Good morning and welcome to day 2 of Bio Summit. Did everybody get some rest yesterday? I hope everybody got some rest. Okay. If you guys don't mind, you can put into the chat, welcome. You can say hello from wherever you are in the world joining us. That'd be great. Again, I just want to shout out and acknowledge to start Vittorio, who organized just a really, really special and wonderful European session for those of you that were there. I think it was at least 2.5 hours of awesomeness. I caught the last hour or so, but yeah, Jan-Maarten, Giuliana, Gunther, everybody that was in that session, just congratulations on a really wonderful family reunion. I thought Vittorio was so excited and you know was worked so hard. So just congratulations to everybody for a really wonderful session, and looking forward to the conversation to continue tomorrow during the regionals. And so just wanted to say really quickly before we get started, I see Giuliana Furci is here, which is really exciting. Just to let everybody know again today, we've got another really, really great morning. We've got Giuliana Furci here from the Fungi Foundation, Bridget Baumgartner from Revive and Restore, Margarita Mora will be joining us a little bit later from Tero. So we'll have a really great session in this morning. But just to start though, does anybody have any questions or anything they want to share just as a reflection from yesterday? I will say I had a small dream come true last night. For those of you that did not stay for it, at the end of the evening plenary, first off, Ahmed Best was amazing. I don't know if you guys all agree, but Ahmed Best, I thought, just gave one of the most incredible talks of my entire life. He broke down the history of hip hop and talked about how the turntable, the crossfader, which was invented by DJ Kool Herc, was basically the open source technology that launched all of hip hop. And then I had a personal dream come true. This may or may not have occurred, but I may or may not have freestyle battled Jar Jar Binks from Star Wars yesterday. So I think the lesson for everybody is, don't miss the open mic and definitely don't miss the party tonight, because we are going to have a very, very, very good time. And also, as a reminder for folks, after we do our evening plenary tonight, which again is going to be a very, very special session, I want to acknowledge Carolyn Angleton for helping to pull together a very, very rich evening. That's going to kick off again at 7 o'clock Eastern time, right here in the Nucleus. We'll do a little bit of reflections, and then I'll turn it over to Carolyn to talk about or to lead the Saturday session. After that, we're going to have another open mic and then transition into the party. So we've got DJ Philip Tan tonight, DJ Norosaurus. I'll do a short set in there at some point, but we've got an amazing lineup of DJs. And then we have an open mic again, where you all will have the chance to share. And just some highlights. I think we had some science trivia last night from Maria and also from Adeline. Kieran sang some songs. Sequoia wrote an original piece and performed it for us. And then we also ended with, I think it was Thelma and Sequoia bending their feet behind their legs in this crazy yoga pretzel, which made me hurt. My body hurt a little bit. So so we have that in store for you later, everybody. So I think we've broken the open mic wall of awkwardness. So now everybody is ready to share. So prepare, think a little bit about what you might want to share with the community. If you've got a song or a joke. Oh, we got some jokes yesterday too. So be ready for the open mic a little bit later on tonight after the evening plenary. But really quickly, before I turn it over and introduce Giuliana, does anybody have anything that they want to share? A quick reflection from yesterday that they might want to offer before we get going? I'm gonna go to my gallery view so I can see anybody. Anybody? Feel free to raise your hand if you want to pop in, or if you have a question about anything about today, about what's going to happen. If everybody's still waking up. So Maria's asking, what was Bio Summit? What was it? What you expected for the new people? Actually, yeah, that's a great question. If there's anybody that's totally new to Bio Summit, do you guys want to share what you thought about yesterday really quickly? You can raise your hand. I think everybody's a little shy right now. Oh, is that Tanishka? Yeah, Tanishka, go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. This is my first time with Bio Summit, and it was really amazing. Like that little space thing where we could talk, and if we are shy, we could just hang around there and listen to people talk. That was really, really amazing. Like it was like we were there offline and we could sneak in, and getting to hear that yeastogram was really amazing.
Hey, great.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Yeah. Shout outs to Gunther for an awesome workshop. And yeah, Tanishka, we'll be doing that again later. So we'll do that during the break. That was called Spatial Chat. And so we'll do that at the break, and we'll also do that during the lunch hour. So you guys can all hang out in there. But super glad that you enjoyed it. Is there anybody else that would like to offer just a quick little reflection, something that they enjoyed or something that they learned from yesterday? And feel free to raise your hand. Yeah, Cristobal.
Yeah, well, felt really welcomed, and I think that it was a really good opportunity to share your first thoughts on the first day, at the end of the first day. And well, I really liked everyone, and I hope to hear more about your projects.
Awesome.
I'm excited about it.
Yeah, Cristobal, I really enjoyed our conversations in the governance section. That was really great. So Cristobal, we're going to do, I think we're going to do the Sweat Lodge jam session, right? That's the plan.
Okay, I'm more than open to it.
We come visit you. Yeah, yeah, awesome. Great. Any other quick reflections from anybody?
Well, I just want to thank Vittorio and everyone for the European section. It was really a nice session earlier today. And I just wanted to share my favorite little thing from Marshall Gans from yesterday. Don't confuse the ups and the downs with ends. That was great.
That was great. And just to say too, everybody, if you, yeah, Rachel, thank you. If you guys check out the Slack again, there's that Words of Wisdom channel. So feel free to drop stuff in there. Oh, and I want to shout out just today, right now, we've got Andy Scarpelli taking notes. I think he's put the notes also in the chat as well. So we're going to try to be a little bit more rigorous today, where we'll actually have a note stock going that anybody can add to while we're going. And also, we'll try to put, if anybody says anything profound, and there's going to be a lot of profundity, I think, feel free to put that into the Words of Wisdom channel. And then I think Justice may be tweeting some things. We were kind of doing that a little ad hoc yesterday, but we'll try to communicate some of the words of wisdom that you all find enlightening. Amanda, did you want to? I saw your hand raised. You want to share really quickly?
Yeah, I was just going to actually echo Rachel and thinking about the plenary. It feels so long ago now, but the day one plenary where Paulo Blickstein basically challenged the idea of, the whole educational industrial complex, but specifically about the idea of failing and how we should embrace failure. And also maybe we should acknowledge that sometimes failure means we need to change our ideas.
I thought he had a great, what was his great quote? Sometimes your idea sucks, not the world.
Suck.
that was like one of the highlights in the morning, definitely. Yeah, sometimes your idea sucks, and that's okay. That's okay. Okay, wonderful. Well, everybody, with that, I'm actually going to transition into welcoming our first speaker. So, okay, so I just have to say, wherever Bob Hendricks is in the world right now, I want to give huge love to Bob. Bob is going to present a little bit later on. He is a designer in the Netherlands and has built this incredible mycelium living coffin, which we'll talk about later on in the session. But Bob sent me this email, like, I don't even know when it was, a bunch of months ago now. It was like, hey, you really need to meet this person, Giuliana. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, anybody Bob wants to introduce me to, great, let's do it. And so I hop onto this Zoom. I have no idea what's going to happen, right? Just like, okay, I'll meet Giuliana. And Giuliana and I, so Giuliana is the president of the Fungi Foundation and is based in Chile and just is doing heroic work. Okay, I won't do her full biography. You can look online. She's got, a tremendous list of accomplishments. But more important than all of the work that she does, Giuliana is a massive Prince fan. Okay, so that's number one. You should all know about Giuliana, massive Prince fan. And also it's just, as you will see, one of the most epic human beings on the planet. The relationship that Giuliana has with mycelium and fungi, it is so incredible. And, again, I think for the larger collective consciousness in society, in a very good way, I think mycelium is now becoming so much more elevated in the larger discourse and much more present. And certainly in this community, folks in this community have been working with mycelium and fungi for many, many years. And so I think, you know, to me, meeting Giuliana was just kind of this incredible, like mind-blowing experience. Like we were laughing and crying and just had this, you know, really remarkable meeting. And I learned so much about mycelium from Giuliana, and her work is just so incredibly inspiring. Not only the technical work, and you know, I'm sure she'll talk a little bit about this atlas that she's making, but the community organizing around it too is so, so special. So I just cannot be more excited to kick off today than to have our soul sister. So Giuliana has, you know, this is her first time stepping into BioSummit, but Giuliana is tribe. Giuliana is just totally tribe. And you know, again, you can check out Fantastic Fungi on Netflix. Giuliana's one of the prominent characters there. So you may have already seen her all there already. But everybody, can we all give a massive BioSummit love, snaps, claps, all the emojis to Giuliana Furci from the Fungi Foundation.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
thank
let's
you.
go.
Hi, everyone. It's such an honor to be here. And honestly, I took off a Prince t-shirt I was wearing earlier. I was like, oh, maybe it's not appropriate. And I, you know,
Oh, no.
Thank you for that. Thank you for introducing me. That's the biggest, most important thing. Massive Prince fan. It really is an honor, and thank you very much for this incredible invitation. And I'm going to share my screen, but I want to just let you know that there was no real title that was appropriate. I asked David, I said, can you help me get a cool title for my talk? So it's about nature-based solutions, it's about the fungi, it's about the future, it's about the past. So I basically titled it Fungi on this. Hold on, I don't want to show you all these other things. Okay, do you see my screen? Yes, okay, yes. So I have been working for the fungi for over 2 decades. I don't want to say how much over, because it just gets worse and worse every year, right? It's good for some things, but, and I am a devotee of this kingdom, the kingdom of the fungi, or queendom, that some might say. We're going to talk a bit about all their applications and all these solutions they have for the future, but let's start wondering and questioning and answering, what are they? Who they are, what they do, how they live, where they live, right? So we have convened as humanity that we divide living organisms in groups based on their type of cell and really more than or, and how they obtain their energy. Now, there are, to many of us, 5 big groups of living organisms that we have called kingdoms, and they are part of a larger organizational group called domains, okay? But in these kingdoms, we can identify 5 large groups based on the type of cell they have and on how they obtain their energy. These differences aren't obvious macroscopically. Many of them have star shapes, for example, as we're seeing here, right? But what we're seeing on the left side of your screen is a plant. A plant is is kingdom Plantae, right? A part of the kingdom Plantae. These are organisms that have a eukaryote cell, so a cell with a defined nucleus, and they have a cell wall made of cellulose. They obtain their energy. Oh, I think somebody drew. No, this one here, the other side. Someone drew on the screen. Oh, okay, hold on. There's control of my screen. Okay, so the green one is the plant, and they obtain their energy through photosynthesis, right? So energy of the sun, water, and a lot of biochemistry going on inside the cell. The organism on the right side of my screen, at least, is a starfish, part of the Animalia kingdom, of which we are also a part. These are organisms that also have a eukaryotic cell, so a cell that has a defined nucleus, but it has a cell membrane and not a cell wall. And animals obtain their energy through ingesting, right? So they eat and and some of them died. Well, some of them excrete the way we do, others don't. Now, the organisms in the middle, the organism in the middle is a representative of the kingdom of the fungi. So fungi are organisms that can form their own kingdom of life. They have a eukaryotic cell also with a defined nucleus, but they have a cell wall made out of chitin, not out of cellulose like plants. And they don't have a cell membrane like animals. So they have a cell wall made out of chitin. That's the same. Chitin is also found in other kingdoms, right? So the exoskeleton of crustaceans also has chitin. But every fungus's cell wall is made of this incredibly strong material, biomaterial called chitin. Now, fungi obtain their energy through absorption. They live inside their food. Fungi are the living proof that no individual is separate from another, that you can't separate an existence from the existence of where its energy comes from. So fungi live inside their food. They secrete enzymes that decompose organic compounds, and then they suck that back up. They absorb it back in. Okay, they're really incredible organisms, and there are inside the kingdom of the fungi, there are aquatic organisms, just like there are aquatic plants and aquatic animals. There are unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms. Now, the other two kingdoms of life that I am not showing on this slide are the almost mostly microscopic kingdoms of life, where we have the protists or protoctista. Kingdom protista or protoctista is a kingdom that that unites a series of eukaryotic celled organisms that basically can't be put in any one of these other three. So you'll find red algae, you'll find amoeba, you'll find slime molds. And lots of people think that slime molds are fungi, but they're part of another kingdom of life. And then there's the Monera kingdom, that's the bacteria, and those are the organisms that have a completely different cell. That's the prokaryotic cell that doesn't have a defined nucleus, right? So we call them primitive organisms. Now, and thank you for everyone who's drawing on the slide. I don't know how to do that, but if I'll learn for the next BioSummit. Now, one of the organisms I really want to talk about are the yeasts. The yeasts are unicellular fungi, and they are responsible for bread and many other things, right? These are organisms that live inside their food, that take sugars and break them down, release alcohol, release carbon dioxide, and multiply at an incredible rate. Anybody who through this pandemic had that moment of baking will have had a very intimate relationship with sourdough and therefore with yeast. Sourdough is basically a cultivation of, is a fungal cultivation, right? People cultivate fungi for different reasons, some for food, some for medicine, body medicine, brain medicine, soul medicine, and some for, fermenting, which also actually could be qualified as mind and soul medicine in many cases, and food medicine. So yeast is responsible for making bread, but it's also responsible for making liquid bread. And basically, beer is nothing more and nothing less than liquid bread, right? It's exactly the same ingredients, but in a liquid form. So when you're told it's too early to have a beer, basically, it would mean it's too early having solid beer, which is bread. So you can contest with that. And yeasts are also organisms that really need some praise, a lot of praise. Without yeast, nothing would ferment, right? So there'd be no wine, there'd be no chocolate, there'd be no incredible tea like the pu'er tea, no soy sauce, no sake, and so many other, just fundamental fundamental pieces of our life and of nature and of that compose nature, right? I want to just also acknowledge that most of the images in this presentation are open sourced and are out of the internet with access of replication. I want to say about the yeast that yeast represents maybe the fundamental basis of ancient technology, biotechnology, to move forward. Now, beer is born many centuries and millennia ago, and it's the oldest form of yeast cultivation known to humankind, and it was born with the purpose of sterilizing a liquid in the Middle East, in these desertic countries that today we know as Iran, mostly what we know as Iran today. It was born so that water could be sterilized and could be transported over days and weeks in extremely hot temperatures without cultivating bacteria that, if drunk by humans, would basically kill them. So beer was born as a way to store and transport water in a safe way for human consumption. Now, it might, sound irrelevant to many of us today, but 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, it was extremely important to be able to contain water, right? Maybe 6,000 years ago is some of the oldest known uses. And the same goes for some of the other products that yeasts are used for. In the case of chocolate, the cacao seed is fermented to give way to this preserved energy source, right? Now, those are the unicellular fungi, the yeast, some of the unicellular fungi. But what about some of these now multicellular yeasts that are really, really important to humanity? Bacteria, still so many of us think about a bacterial infection and get really freaked out. But for fungi, no problem at all, right? Fungi have been used as antibiotics for many thousands of years. There's evidence of the Neanderthal using and sort of munching on moldy plants or moldy seeds to fight tooth infection, for example, right? Now, what you see here on the screen is the photo of the organism. This is the mold of the genus Penicillium, from which penicillin, and there's penicillium in an electron scan microscopy image. This fungus, when confronted with a bacteria, starts a battle. It brings out all its weapons, and the weapons are visible in the form of secondary metabolites that are these droplets that you can see on the top of the mold in the image. And these droplets contain penicillin. These droplets, if you have a bacterial infection and you directly consume the droplets produced by this mold when in contact with bacteria, you're basically taking antibiotics. Now, what's happening today is that there are incredible scientists like Tradd Cotter, for example, who is trying to combat the large pharmaceutical companies. And really it is a combat. It's as big a combat as the penicillium mold with bacteria, right, in a plate or in nature, because of different patents and the issue of breaking patents and pending patents, etc. But what he's doing is that he is getting fungi inside cultivation bags. He's getting some people who are ill. You might have a strep throat, for example. You can put a bit of your saliva in that bag and the fungus will bioengineer the perfect antibiotic you need for the infection you have. And so what Tradd has been doing is getting people with strep throat, putting some of their saliva inside these bags, collecting the droplets of the secondary metabolite, giving it back to the patient, and basically getting rid of the strep throat. So some of these solutions that we think were really old, right? 50,000 years ago, you know, there was this anecdotal use. Well, actually, it's the medicine of the future too. I'd say that probably there's a lapsus at the moment with the big, you know, big companies that have sort of appropriated this technology that is part of humanity, and it's the patrimony of all of us. Now, let's get planetary, right? So I spoke a bit about the unicellular yeast. We've spoken about the first, you know, more microscopic multicellular yeast, but there's this incredible group of fungi that create a system and a structure called mycelium, right? Now, what is mycelium? Most of us who have seen the movie Fantastic Fungi, or have listened to Paul Stamets talk, or have seen the film Avatar, which is actually really inspired truly on mycelium, we know that mycelium is this underground network. It can also be not overground. It can live inside wood. It can live inside your bathroom walls. You know, we'll think about that later. But it's this system, that a network that is built by microscopic filaments that you see here in this microscope photo called hyphae. These are filaments that only grow in a linear way, that are one cell high, right? So they only grow in a linear way. They can move through their food, branch out, fuse together, and create this system. The hyphae create this system that we know as mycelium, that's in this middle photograph. And this mycelium is the equivalent of a vegetative state of a plant, right? So this is the fungus, right? This fungus, in the form of a mycelium, lives inside wood, can live inside scat. It lives in and on roots, in and on plant cells, and in different parts of the world, of the planet. Now, this mycelium, once or twice a year, maybe, will produce a macroscopic spore-producing body, right? A macroscopic structure that we call a mushroom, or a puffball, or a coralloid fungus, you know, or bird's nest fungus. These things that we see, these structures that we eat, but the only function of that structure is to produce and disperse spores that are the way that this fungus can sexually reproduce. So it's for genetic recombination, right? But this mycelium can reproduce asexually through fragmentation, for example, and also there are very complex asexual life cycles inside kingdom of the fungi. So mycelium is basically a structure that, when living on plant roots and living underground, is the equivalent to microscopic rivers of forests. They transport these hyphae that are sort of these tube-like filaments, transport water, nutrients, electric impulses, basically transport information underground. And we know that there's an estimate that the coverage of the mycelium of the world, you know, the underground, if we were to flush it out and really thread out the mycelium, it's as big as the galaxy that we know already. Now, this begs the question, right? So we're talking about these organisms that live inside their food. Fungi are basically, how would say, completing one of two large fundamental roles in nature. One is to decompose. They decompose organic matter, right? Basically, they rot things. They make things decay. And decay is associated to something, you know, to an end. And I loved what you were talking about at the beginning, of that person saying, you know, that maybe the ups and downs on an end. I think that was the quote. Now, decomposition and decay is not death. what decomposition is doing and what decay is doing is ending one life form to give way to many other life forms through the process of decomposition that basically is recycling, right? What fungi do when a plant or an animal ends, its life ends, fungi come in and balance out the availability of energy so that that energy can recompose in another life form. Now that's decomposition. And the other very important role that fungi are living out in nature is everything symbiotic, right? Fungi are by excellence some of nature's most important symbionts. How important is it? Oh, it gets really important. Now, life originates in an aquatic atmosphere, right, in water. But through many planetary changes, when Earth is formed, Earth, I'm talking about terrestrial systems, when there is land above, out of water, exposed to the atmosphere, organisms have an opportunity to get out of the aquatic system and to, let's imagine, climb onto the ground, climb onto rock. Now, the first organisms, living organisms to do that are plants, people think. But actually, the first organisms to do that are symbionts, right? They're plants with fungi, or they're fungi with plants. Algae and fungi get into a really deep symbiotic relationship that allows them to climb out of water together and conquer terrestrial ecosystem, conquer rock. Now that symbiosis is very evident today in lichens. A lichen is a symbiotic organism of an algae, a fungus, sometimes a cyanobacteria, right? But every lichen is a symbiotic organism between algae and fungi. Now, when life conquers this terrestrial ecosystem, thanks to fungi, right? You know, plant people and botanists, we'll call them botanists, I call them plant people. They're like, oh, you know, fungi are, you know, a symbionts of plants. But really for us mycologists, a plant is just a photosynthetic symbiont of a fungus. You can see things in different ways. But what's ultimately happening is that every single plant on Earth, almost every plant, let's say over 99% of plants on Earth, cannot live on soil without the fungi on or in their roots that synthesize the nutrients in the soil for that plant. So when we look at a plant and when we look at a tree, what are we looking at? Are we looking at a plant species? Actually, no. A tree is a symbiotic organism of a plant with several fungi that live on or in its roots. The ectomycorrhizal fungi that create mycelium under the soil actually have the system, this mycelial system of hyphae envelops the root tips and the roots of a tree and extends the area of absorption of water, of nutrients, connects trees to other trees in the forest floor, you know, under the forest floor, creating all these nutrient, water, and basically information streams, allowing for the system to function. So a tree is probably one of the most graphic examples that individuals don't exist. An old tree, for example, is nothing less, nothing more than a symbiotic organism of a plant with several fungi. The estimate, for example, for the British Isles is that for every tree, there are at least 6 specific species of fungi. In boreal forests, we know that it's up to 23 species of fungi per species of tree. So ultimately, you know, really the plant arguably is the photosynthetic symbiont of many fungi living in the soil. Now, in this incredible symbiosis, what's also happening is a lot of carbon sequestration, right? The mycorrhizal network, so the root with the fungi, is one of the biggest carbon stores in nature. So what is a tree? A tree is not an individual. A tree is the example that individuals don't exist, that no one exists without another. And that comes from when life emerges from an aquatic ecosystem. Now,
Giuliana, so sorry,
yeah.
Really quickly, just letting you know, we've got about a little more than 5 minutes left. Just letting you know, giving you a heads up.
Thank you, thank you. And then, so with this mycelium, we can have, we're going back to the roots, right? We're going back to what we can do. And David mentioned Loop, right? Loop Biotech, who make these incredible living cocoons, coffins. That's made from the mycelium of a tree fungus called Ganoderma. And also companies like Ecologies and others are making biopackaging with this, right? But what they're using is this ancient natural technology that actually allowed for life to, come out of an aquatic system to start addressing some of the most pressing problems that we have today, like plastics, for example, using unsustainable sources of packaging, sorry. But also these fungi have been used for a very long time to make clothing. Many of you may know this incredible man, dear friend and brother Paul Stamets. He's wearing a hat made out of amadou, like the one that's behind me. Now, amadou is a material used by Eastern Europeans a very long time ago that comes from this fungus, right? But today, what apparently is a huge revolution in using mushroom leather, mycelium leather by companies like Bolt Threads, Milo, Mycoworks. Adidas is making Stan Smith sneakers out of mycelium. Stella McCartney's making a handbag. But really, this is an ancient technology made of mycelium. It's this structure that enables terrestrial ecosystems to function, that today is moving forward and is presented as a technology of the future. This is an essential technology of life on Earth, and it's an ancient technology. Now, fungi not only have been used in the past as an incredible technology as materials. I just wanted to put this in because I think it's absolutely awesome. This is, that's my son's hand when he was a little boy drawing hearts for his mom, with a feather. But this is a very old technology, one of the first ink forms in humanity. The first inks ever used in the Middle Ages came from this fungus, these ink caps that are edible. Some of them are edible when they're young, but not only are they the incredible, natural technology to be able to communicate through writing, through drawing. This was used, unfortunately for many, by the Nazis to be able to communicate in a safe way, right? This is an ancient form of encryption, okay? So the official documents that some of the Nazis would use would be written with this ink, and you could verify that it was an original and safe document by looking at the microscope and seeing that the spores of the fungus were in the ink, right? If the spores weren't in the ink, the document was fake. So here we're looking at what we think is new, safe encryption. You can find this in nature, in the past, and in the fungi, of course. And to finish, I just wanted to talk a bit about this incredible itch that humanity has of looking to the celestial from Earth, right? And what we're seeing today in the psychedelic revolution is really a manifestation of very old ways of healing and living. The ancient Egyptians would use ergot, which is a fungus that grows on rye, from which LSD is synthesized. They would use that in rituals. Baco, the gods that the Romans and Greeks would really praise for making wine. Well, it's yeast. And in Scandinavia, the thunder gods are associated to the fungi. But ultimately, in this search of humanity, from looking to the celestial, from from earth in every culture, from the Maya, the Aztecs. There's his sun god in Angkor Wat holding a mushroom, Buddha in the Tassili in what is today Algeria, Buddha under a mushroom, Motasili art, Maria Sabina and the Masatecs. And ultimately today, Christianity still uses fungi to reach the celestial from the terrestrial, because in the Roman Catholic Church, communion is taken with wine and bread, and without fungi, there's no wine and there's no bread. So what I wanted to end with is saying that fungi ultimately have been a way to prove that we are all interconnected. No one exists without another. That decomposition, fungi prove that the end of a life form is merely the beginning of many others, and that fungi are essential to humanity in this quest to find meaning in nature and the universe from the terrestrial. Thank you very much.
Everyone, can we give just a huge round of applause, all of your claps, snaps, and love to Giuliana Furci. Giuliana, you should look at the chat, hang around at least for a little bit. The chat has been like just insane, just all of the discussion that's going on here. I always feel like it's a good virtual conference when the chat feels like its own conference, and there's a whole massive discussion here. Maybe just very quickly, we could take just one question or before we move on to Bridget and Revive and Restore. Does anybody have any quick questions for Giuliana? I saw at least a couple of comments, but feel free to raise your hand if you do have a quick question. I think, Carolyn, you had one in there.
Gosh, I'm out of words. It wasn't me, sorry.
It wasn't you? Okay.
Amanda Strawhacker, it looks like.
Amanda Strawhacker. Yeah, Amanda, did you want to ask your question?
I have 1,000. Okay, so Giuliana, first of all, this is my second time that I get to hear you speak, and every time I just feel like I learn so much. Thank you so much for imparting your wisdom so eloquently that it feels simple. For someone like, the mere mortals among us who have not spent hours and hours hanging out with fungi and would like to, what's your best recommendation for, becoming friends with fungi?
Read Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake.
All right, there it is.
That's it. Yeah. Thank you very much for this. Thank you, David. Thank you to everybody for listening.
Giuliana, mind blown. Again, just to really quickly synthesize, I mean, you brought us from the earth to, oh, can you clarify? You said something that all of us in the chat were like, is this true? You said that if you stretched out all of the mycelium networks, that it would be the size of the known galaxy. Is that, can you just say that one more time? Oh, you're muted, Giuliana. Oh, you're muted, Giuliana.
So, okay, sorry. I'm going to put in the chat some data on the length of mycelium right now.
Okay. Okay.
So you can move on. I'm putting it in now so you can have that and you can look it up and the references and everything. Perfect.
But Giuliana, your talk was such a perfect segue, both today's sessions on Guardianship of Ecosystems later and also Ancient Future Technology, which is happening tomorrow. So mind blown. Thank you so much again for reconnecting us with the Earth and the galaxy and the future and the present. So one more time for Giuliana Furci, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Giuliana. And please hang out with us, all day, whenever, just pop into any of the rooms. We would be so honored to have you. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, everybody. So we're gonna go from the world of mycelium and fungi. We're gonna stay in our ecosystems, but we're gonna bring in potentially still some future technologies, but also some ancient technologies, and also as a way to guard our ecosystems. We're going to move into the world of Revive and Restore. And so it's a huge honor to introduce Bridget Baumgartner. So I'm going to see if we can spotlight Bridget. Oh, thank you. There we go. And so Bridget, again, is one of the wonderful folks that's a part of an organization called Revive and Restore, which if you have not heard about it, you should please go check them out. And again, Bridget's work and Revive and Restore's work connects with these larger themes around conservation and how do we get out of the kind of tremendous ecosystem issues that we're all dealing with as a biosphere, that the living world is dealing with. And I think one of the really exciting things, and if we don't mind, also just Rod, if you can help just mute everybody that is not muted right now. I think I see, there we go, okay. But I think one of the really incredible things about Revive and Restore's work is that they bring in these very, very sophisticated biotechnologies, synthetic biology, some of the real advanced technologies that we've developed in the Western world, and are using it in this way that for some is very controversial, but I think as Bridget will explain, maybe it's not so different from actually some of the very ancient technologies that human civilization has been working with for hundreds to thousands of years. And so, Bridget, I am so excited for you to be here with us at BioSummit. Bridget also was a guest speaker in my class earlier this year and just gave such a mind-blowing talk. So I'm really excited for you to share about the work. And yeah, and again, I couldn't think of a better kind of arc of talks than to have you and Giuliana and also Margarita Mora here this morning. So everybody, can you please join me in welcoming from Revive and Restore, Bridget Baumgartner.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, David. I was honored to do your class, and I'm glad I passed the tryouts and got an invite to this cool conference. I'm going to share my screen, and you can tell me if I did it right.
We can see, yes, beautiful.
All right, I have to hit play. All right, so hi, everyone. I'm from Revive and Restore, as David just introduced. Our organization is a nonprofit. We're based in California, and we try to promote the use and development of biotechnologies for the genetic rescue of endangered and extinct species. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we mean by that in a sec. We're a really small team. I really have to get a picture of Sally. She's been around for a month now, no excuse. But we're only 6 people, and we collaborate with others in a variety of fields in order to get our work done. And this is basically the overview of what we're trying to accomplish. So Revive and Restore is a relatively new organization. It was incubated in another nonprofit called Long Now. And Long Now promotes the use of, or the thinking of large periods of time. Instead of like thinking about the next quarterly report for your business, Long Now promotes the idea of using a 20,000 year window of time as the present. So we consider the last 10,000 years as the recent past and the future 10,000 years as the near-term future. And in that span of time for Revive and Restore, we think about things like biodiversity and bioabundance and how they've changed over this window of time. So in the last 10,000 years, we know that bioabundance and biodiversity have declined precipitously as humans have become the dominant species on the planet, and civilizations have been born and technologies have advanced. And if we take this as an actual graph, it's obviously just an artistic representation, but we'd be today at the 0 point. What we'd like to see, and the reason that Revive and Restore was started, is we'd like to reverse this trend, make the world more biodiverse, but also more bioabundant by promoting the protection and the expansion of other species that are not human, both in terms of numbers and in diversity. And the way we plan to do that and still maintain human lifestyles and all the things that are important to us as a species, we're going to apply biotechnologies so that in the next 10,000 years, we can see a reversal of this trend and a restoration of life on the planet. So that's the idea. The approach that we take is called genetic rescue, and this is not a new idea for conservation scientists or practitioners. It's basically the idea that if you want to improve the fitness of a population of a species that's under management, you can do that by manipulating the gene pool available for that species. So for example, Florida panthers got to an extremely small population relatively recently. So in the 1990s, I think they were down to like 30 individuals in all of Florida. And that started to create some major inbreeding problems. So fewer individuals there are for finding mates, obviously those mates start to become more and more related over time. And this species, or this population of this species, was starting to show real negative consequences of this inbreeding. So they were becoming less fit and they were making less offspring. And so, you know, conservationists could see the trend was not good for this species. And what they decided to do was something at the time was pretty radical. They went to Texas, which is over 1,000 kilometers away. They picked up 8 females and translocated them to Florida and added them to the breeding population in Florida. And this actually had a profound benefit for this population. And today, we know that there's over 200 individuals in the wild. They've lost these inbreeding signs and they're doing quite well with the addition of these new genomes into their gene pool. So that's the idea of genetic rescue, is you identify a population that's gene pool is suffering for one reason or another, and then you try to fix that gene pool. At Revive and Restore, we believe that there are a lot of modern technologies from the biotech world, specifically developed for medicine and agriculture, that can be used to enhance our genetic rescue ability. We call this the genetic rescue toolkit. And this is how we sort of envision the toolkit either being developed or being used, with the things that are most available today, ready to go at, let's say, industrial scale, being all the way on the left. So these are things like sequencing and biobanking for genomic insight. And as this graph goes to the right and goes up, these tools become more advanced and sometimes even more into the future. Like some of these things don't exist yet. So things like de-extinction technology, where we actually restore a missing species using genetic engineering tools, that's something that we see off in the future, but we are very much interested in doing today. The genetic rescue toolkit is at various stages of development. We have demonstration projects going on in several of these areas. And I can tell you from my 3 years of doing this now that this idea to most people seems like completely cutting edge and or crazy or a bit sci-fi. This is not something that people consider to be a normal use of technology or a normal way for humans to interact with the natural environment. How do I get my slides to advance? But I'll tell you that it's actually a very ancient way to think about interactions with other species. In fact, in the ancient world, humans would manipulate the genomes of other species rather routinely for the benefit of themselves and also the species. So this has been a way in the past of collaborating with other species for setting up sort of win-win situations. And all we have to do is look at the domesticated species that we still have today as evidence of that. So right now there are something like 300 domesticated species that humans still use for agriculture mostly, but also for companionship of labor and medicines. And these are all things that were domesticated, I think, thousands of years ago. We don't do this anymore. And mostly they were domesticated from the ancient civilizations of Mesoamerica and South America. And these things are common now, they're all over the world. We've moved them around, which is something that people consider to be a very bad idea now, without totally destroying the planet. And just to give you an idea of the scale of the manipulations that these domestications required, corn or maize, it has 1,200 genes that have been modified compared to its nearest wild relative. 1,200 genes is something that we don't even consider doing right now, right? Sometimes we want to tweak a gene or two to make corn a little bit more robust or nutritious, but 1,200 genes is not something that we're capable of anymore. Similarly, dogs, the domestic dog has 400 gene modifications relative to its nearest wild ancestor, which is the European wolf. So this scale of genetic manipulation from ancient technologies is way beyond anything that we're doing right now. And it's sort of interesting that that we've gotten to the point where this kind of thing is like, scary or seems like really far out in the future for us. We just heard about all the uses of fungi. There's also plants that have been, domesticated for making textiles and even infrastructure. Move my slide. So this is an example of living infrastructure. These living root bridges are still being built by an ancient society in the northeastern corner of India. And these are living bridges made out of the roots of fig trees. And so they're structurally very sound. You can have 50 or 100 people walk across these bridges at once. And they last like 300 years and they repair themselves, and they're really great structurally and also as infrastructure. But we don't do things like this anymore. And the reason is, I think, there are several reasons, but one of the main reasons that we really can't engage in manipulation of other species to solve our modern day problems is because it takes a really long time. So all of these things, either domestication of food or building of living root bridges, these are multi-generation projects. They produce really awesome technology for a long time in the future. Other future generations will use these things, but they don't solve an immediate problem the way that we like to solve things today. And so I think the addition of biotechnology is going to be really important to starting to solve the things that we know need. We don't have multiple generations to solve. So the biodiversity crisis, climate change crisis. If we can speed up the time it takes to take advantage of the life around us, I think that would be a beneficial thing to do. All right. Okay, so let's go back to the genetic rescue toolkit. I've already described to you a little bit about how we envision it laying out. The purpose of the genetic rescue toolkit is to solve totally intractable problems for conservation. So there are several things that conservation, the traditional way of doing conservation from like the 1960s can't solve. And one of them is genetic bottlenecks. So just like the Florida panther, when we reduce the size of populations down to a very few individuals, the gene pool shrinks to the point where lots of inbreeding starts to happen, and there's just not a lot of variety to repair them. So even if you increase the number of individuals, the number of genes available to be passed around is still small, right? And I'll give you an example of that in a second. Exotic diseases is another major problem. We move things around the world really quickly now. I think we can all relate to that now because COVID-19 just moved around the world in a matter of a couple of weeks. It's been a kind of a problem to deal with for that reason. We do that to wildlife constantly. We are always moving wildlife diseases from Asia to North America and back again. And it's really hard for natural organisms to keep up with that kind of thing because they don't have, vaccines and clinics and things like that. Invasive species is a similar thing. We move things from one place of the world to a place where they don't have natural predators, and sometimes that disrupts the balance of the ecosystem where they wind up living. And then of course, extinction is a hard thing to deal with because of the permanence of it. So these are the things that we try to aim our genetic rescue toolkit at, to come up with options for repairing or reversing the effects of these seemingly permanent problems. So I'm going to give you an example of restoring genetic diversity, just to put some context here. And if there's time, I'll also talk about de-extinction after that. Okay, so the black-footed ferret is a famous endangered species, the most endangered mammal of North America. They're very cute, you can see in the picture here. And they used to range all over the middle part of the United States and down into Mexico. And for many reasons, black-footed ferrets have been on the decline for hundreds of years until they were actually thought to be extinct twice. And then in 1981, serendipitously, somebody's dog found the last colony of black-footed ferrets living in Wyoming. That was in 1981. There was, I think, maybe 12 or 15 of them living there. And what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service decided to do was round up these last living ferrets and put them into a captive breeding program to make more ferrets, and then they would release them out into the wild. And that actually worked really well. It turns out black-footed ferrets breed really well in captivity, and they've produced thousands of these since the 80s and released them. However, because black-footed ferrets got down to, I think, 7 breeding individuals, the ones that live in the wild now are all really, really closely related. They're all like half siblings to first cousins. And this has become a problem. They've noticed that you know, just like the Florida panthers, they're starting to show signs that there's not a big enough gene pool for the black-footed ferret. And so several years ago, Fish and Wildlife Service came to Revive and Restore, and they said, what can you do for us? Is there something in your genetic rescue toolkit that can help restore the genetic diversity of this breeding population? Because, you know, we're running out of genes in the gene pool. Oh, no, okay. So what we did is we went back to their breeding pedigree, they call it. They've done a really good job keeping track of how they bred these animals in captivity, which is important for this project. They know who's mother and father for any living ferret out there. They also did a really cool thing, which is that as ferrets died, they collected samples of their tissues and they stored it at a place called the Frozen Zoo at the San Diego Zoo. And this is Oliver Ryder I'm showing you here. He runs the San Diego Frozen Zoo. And starting in the 80s, when they picked up the original colony, they've been collecting tissue samples from all of these ferrets. And the cool thing is that they did this not even knowing what they were going to do with these tissue samples. There was no technology that said, we can make use of these things one day. They just thought, probably someone's going to invent something that will make these tissue samples useful. And that day is today, as it turns out, which is good. So we went back and we looked at all these samples from the various generations of black-footed ferrets that have been bred in captivity. And we found out that there were 2 from the original population that don't currently have any living descendants. For whatever reason, they didn't breed early on. And so the idea was if we could bring those 2 back through cloning, we could introduce 2 more founders. So we had 7 founders, and we can go up to 9 founders, which is a huge advantage for the gene pool. I can show you the math, but just take my word for it. These individuals increase the genetic diversity of the population by a lot. Okay, so this is the format we conceived of. We're going to take the cells in culture from the Frozen Zoo in San Diego. They were originally from a black-footed ferret that died in the 1980s. And a domestic ferret, which is actually a close relative and conveniently a lab model organism. And we're going to do interspecies cloning. This is a technology that's used for agriculture all the time, never been used for conservation before. So the way it works is you fuse the donor cell for the black-footed ferret to a nucleus, to an oocyte from the domestic ferret to create an embryo. And then you implant it into a domestic ferret surrogate mother. If the embryo is viable and the fetus is carried to term, the resulting progeny will be genetically identical to that donor cell, which is from a black-footed ferret. So you get a black-footed ferret being born from a domestic ferret. And this actually worked. And last December, Elizabeth Ann, this little clone here, was born. And she is genetically identical to Willa, who was a ferret that died in 1981. And that's kind of a cool idea. It's really cool when you consider that her mother, or her surrogate mother rather, was a completely different species. So on the left, I'm showing her mother, whose name is, I don't remember her name. She has a good name. But Elizabeth Ann, to the right, this is her as an adult, obviously a different species. So this is a new way of adding genetic diversity using cells that were collected in the past. And we could consider doing this for other species as well. We've already done this one other time with Przewalski's horse, which is a wild horse that we used a domestic surrogate for. And so this is a potential way of increasing the gene pool when there are no other options, like you can't just go to Texas and get another population and bring them, to Florida. In this case, we went back to the past, grabbed genetic diversity from the past and brought it into the present. So that kind of thing, if you think about it at scale, let me go back for a second here to this image. Imagine you could do genetic manipulations or gene editing technologies to the donor cell that we have in the San Diego Zoo. So if we wanted to add genes, for example, that never existed in the gene pool, maybe something that would create a disease resistance allele or a vaccine, we could do that using this technology. And we're going to be exploring those approaches in the future. But take that a step further to what if we could edit many of these genes, maybe 50 of these genes, and put it back into an embryo? What could we do then? And that's the kind of technology that we consider for de-extinction. So de-extinction, this is a hugely controversial project area that we have. Obviously, people have very strong opinions about whether this is the coolest thing they ever heard or like obviously the end of the world. De-extinction is just basically a scaled up version of what we did with the black-footed ferrets with the addition of gene editing tools. So I'm going to go through quickly what de-extinction projects look like and how we decide whether or not a particular lost species is worth reviving. And I'll leave it for you guys to decide how you feel about it. So there are a series of questions that we go through when we consider whether or not to try and de-extinct species. And I'll just say right now, despite popular opinion, we have never actually de-extincted a species. So the black-footed ferret was not extinct when we brought it back, for example. We brought back an extinct individual, but the species is very much not extinct. But in many cases, there are species that we would like to see brought back from the past. One of the questions we ask is, how did it go extinct? Is this something that humans wiped out? Or is it just, it was unfit for the environment? That's an important distinction. Of course, if humans played a strong role in the loss of that species, we'd be more inclined to want to fix it. We want to know if it's a keystone species, meaning, does this species create its own ecosystem? Are we going to be reviving an entire ecosystem if we bring back this one species? We want to know that there's habitat available. Do we have some place to plant? Is something else living where that animal used to live in the ecosystem? Is the niche empty or is it already occupied? That's an important question. And then of course, do we have the tools that we need in order to do for the technology? So is there a living relative? Do we have genomic sequence? Do we know what the genes are that we've lost? And is there a living tissue sample? That's not totally necessary, but really helpful. So when we identify a good candidate, the woolly mammoth is one. It's actually a very strong candidate for de-extinction. Passenger pigeons are another one that we're working on. But the general protocol is the same. So the phase one is figure out what the genetic differences are between the living relative and the extinct species that we're going after. How many different genes are altered between them, but also which genes are most important for the behavior or the phenotype that we're looking to recreate. And an important thing to notice here is that we're not talking about making a carbon copy of the extinct animal. We're talking about genetically modifying an existing animal to appear and behave like the lost animal. So these will be not the same as what we lost, but should function the same. So once we have a list of genes that we want to alter, and just to give you an idea of scale for the woolly mammoth, that's about 50 genes between an Asian elephant and a woolly mammoth. The next stage is to actually do the cell manipulations, the gene editing technologies in order to make those changes in culture. And that's kind of where we are right now. That's the state of the art, figuring out how to scale up those technologies so that we can do this in a reasonable amount of time for like less than $1 gazillion. And then once the gene editing technology and that phase is complete, the phase 3, which hasn't even been started for any of this, would be to figure out how, like all the animal husbandry, how do we get this animal born and healthy and socialized and able to work in the environment we intended. So this is an example from Asian elephants. We want to make Asian elephants that can replace the woolly mammoth in its native ecosystem. And one of the things I always get asked is, well, you know, how are they going to be adapted? Obviously, this is a cruel thing to put an elephant in the cold. I just want to show this picture from these elephants live in Canada. Apparently, they love the snow. They just can't live there without some habitat for the really coldest days. But the idea that elephants are somehow psychologically damaged by cold weather, I think many people have convinced me otherwise. So I'm going to leave that there. And I just want to encourage you guys to come visit our website if you're interested in any of this stuff. We have projects that are aimed at the conservation of over 50 species now. So we have quite a lot going on there. and explains a lot of this background better than I was able to do today. And I welcome any kind of questions that you guys have.
Okay, everybody, can we just do a round of applause and thanks to Bridget Baumgartner? Thank you, Bridget. And we definitely have some time for some questions, and there have been the chat again, Bridget, if you have a chance to just flip through it, there's a lot of reaction and discussion in the chat. Two things I want to quickly ask you, because again, I've in hearing you speak about the work at Revive and Restore. One, I remember you had where you talked about kind of the human impacts on climate and how that has accelerated so dramatically that that in a way it's sort of forcing the need for biotechnologies to potentially play a role, because the natural ecosystems just can't catch up to the rate of change. Do you mind just like making that point? So there's 2 points. There's that one, and then the other one I think from that Clubhouse event thing where I think it was Ben was talking about the fact that interventions with conservation in mind have basically the whole idea that if we're humans are always like messing things up by moving things, and that actually for conservation purposes it's actually been very successful. I was wondering if you could just make those 2 points. I think that'd be helpful context for this group.
Yeah, so the first point is having to do with timescales. I made the point during David's class that most every organism on Earth adapts to change in their environment. I mean, that's just a prerequisite of life. But they do it through a very common mechanism, which is evolution. So an organism wanting to adapt to its environment will, make a mutation, and that mutation will be selected for, and then the next generation will promote that mutation and so on. Humans don't work on that timescale anymore, I think, obviously. When we have to adapt to our environment, we make a tool. And we implement that tool, and then in order to spread it, we just tell somebody, look, I just made this tool and it really works well, you should do this too. And our ability to do that has gone faster and faster and faster as civilization and technology has advanced. It's kind of like this positive feedback, right? We get better at technology, then we get better at communicating that technology. And so we are changing things in our environments now on timescales that are, orders of magnitude faster than the traditional timescale of evolution and natural selection. So that's really the problem. It's not that nature can't adapt to us. It's that by the time the adaptation that nature comes up with exists and is being selected for, we've already changed like 4 times over. And this is also why it's really hard to imagine using other species to solve our problems instead of just going to chemistry or concrete and steel. It's because it takes so long to modify those species. The exception, of course, is with microbes. So that's why fungi are such fantastic biotechnology tools, because of their short generation time. It allows us to actually work with them. So that's the question for one. The timescale difference needs to be resolved so that we can actually change things or improve things or repair climate change and all that on timescales that make sense. And then the second question, David, was what? About our ability to intervene. So yeah, there are most people's concern about the technologies that we're proposing are, well, every time we try to intervene in nature, we make a mess. I mean, look at the cane toad situation in Australia, for example, and that is a giant mess. I will agree to that. But it turns out that these stories that we all know about the times that things have gone really, really badly are complete outliers. And we've done this research and it's published now. You can read about it. But it turns out that especially since the time that ecology has become an actual science, our ability to intervene in nature almost 100% of the time has resulted in either positive or neutral effects on the environment. People use translocation of species, for example, way more than you would even imagine. And I think there were 1,000 examples that we looked at from the United States alone, actually. Over time, 99.5% of the time, no negative consequences were realized from those interventions. And so we actually are better at this than people really know. And we need to build up our self-esteem a little bit, I think, when we think about these things.
So Bridget, again, there are like the chat is exploding with questions. I think one thing I may ask, if it's okay, we have a Slack channel as well, Bridget, that if you can hop onto, we can continue the conversation there and we can have a little more back and forth because there's a lot of questions. Amanda, did you want to pull out the highlight. If there's I think there's at least a couple questions that were asked several times. Did you want to pull out one that we can ask?
Sure, and I see some hands raised in the audience too.
I do, but
a couple of the highest level questions I think you already kind of touched on, but one that people keep circling around is the mammoths. Why specifically mammoths? And if you could talk about what the habitat will be like for them when you bring the sort of de-extinct them, and the broader question of what this does to the equilibrium of habitats, and are we solving a symptom without solving the cure, kind of those broader questions.
So specifically the mammoths, turns out, so elephants used to live like over most of the earth until about 10,000 years ago, some places less. So these are not, a lot of people think that mammoths lived at the time of the dinosaurs. That's not the case. They're relatively recent extinct species. They perform, so elephants in general, just anywhere, perform habitat creating kind of service to their environment. They create grasslands. You can't have grasslands without elephants. And the reason is because they're big enough to knock trees over, and they do that because they like to eat grass. So it's they create the entire ecosystem around them by doing this. As it turns out, in the Siberian tundra, used to be called the Mammoth Steppe, that was always grassland when they lived there. And grass, as it turns out, is a much better carbon storage system for cold environments. And the reason is that the grass grows really quickly in the summer, and then in the winter it gets covered with snow and it becomes part of the permafrost. And so it buries that carbon rather than decaying and releasing it back into the air. So when it's warm, you want trees because trees hold on to the carbon in the wood. But in cold areas, the grass is actually quite good at burying that carbon. Because grass had always been there for millions of years, now that the permafrost is starting to warm, it's actually a double whammy, because the grass is going to start, the decayed grass over eons is going to be released as methane. And so there, if you've read about the methane bomb that's waiting to go off in the tundra, that's why. And elephants and other large herbivores actually tend to keep the permafrost colder by moving the snow out of the way in the winter so they can eat it. And that actually makes the permafrost colder from the air. So it's this whole ecological system that has been disrupted by the loss of these animals. And that's what we're trying to replace. Turns out nothing else is living there now because, one, it's Siberia. There's not even a lot of humans there. But no other large herbivore has replaced the role of elephants. And we want to put that role back if we can.
So everybody, Bridget, if you don't mind, just send a private message to Arnav, who's here. Arnav is our Slack master, and he can add you onto our Slack. We've got a channel called Ancient Future Technology. So if you don't mind, you can kind of pop in there and folks can ask more questions. And we'll do one more super quick question and then wrap up. Pete Carr, so glad to see you, Pete. Maybe we can do just one quick final question from you, Pete.
Sure, and thanks, Bridget, for just a really eye-opening talk. It was great. I was wondering in particular whether R&R is looking at the dwindling Tasmanian devil population, which is suffering from a really interesting kind of weird disease related to the lack of genetic diversity.
We do not have a devil project right now, although we do talk about them a lot. One is a kind of like a cautionary tale of how important it is to know what the genotype of the translocated individuals are that you're moving around. So for those that don't know, the Tasmanian devil was a conservation target, and people have moved them from one place to the other in Australia. But the source population or the population that they were trying to save was inbred already. So they were really closely related individuals. And now they suffer from lots of disease because of their lack of genetic diversity. So yes, the short answer is we do talk about devils. We have not actually started a project there, but they are a great example of something that this technology can be used to help.
Thank you.
Everybody, can we give one more round of applause to Bridget Baumgartner for blowing our minds and presenting some really, really interesting possibilities for the future. Bridget, thank you so much. And again, in the chat, there's also a link right to the Slack channel. I think people are very excited to continue asking questions and engaging there. So
okay, I'll go there.
Thank you, Bridget. You are the best. Rod, if you don't mind, could we spotlight Margarita Mora? So it is my huge pleasure to introduce as our next speaker, Margarita Mora. So again, Margarita, we've had a really great morning. We started with Giuliana Furci from the Fungi Foundation. I think you've heard a lot of Bridget's talk now from Revive and Restore. So a bunch of really interesting perspectives on environment, climate, ecosystems, and different approaches that we as humanity can or maybe should not be doing in sort of how we engage with our natural world. And Margarita, you've been a part of BioSummit for at least since last year. And just to say as well, I think I might have shared this with you, but yesterday we for the first time awarded the LaDonna Brave Bull Science Activist Award to one of our community members, Jean-Luc Purit. And one of the things that I thought that was really remarkable from LaDonna's family was her perspective on, how can we merge the old ways with the new? That was a line that, really resonated from something LaDonna had said. And so I'm just so excited that you're here to talk about the work of Tero, the work of Indigenous communities that you've been a part of over the years. And again, I think all of the perspectives that you have to share and have shared in previous BioSummits are so valuable for this community and really for our entire living world. So everybody, can you please join me in welcoming to the BioSummit, Margarita Mora from Tero.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you everyone for joining this conversation. Today, I know that it is not any longer that early for you. It is not that early for me either, but I am calling today from Coast Salish territory nearby Seattle, and I am Margarita Mora. I am the Managing Director of Partnerships at Tero, and I mostly work to ensure that Indigenous peoples have the right allies and the right support they deserve in order to keep our planet healthy and keep their cultures vibrant. So today I am going to talk a bit about the work, but I want to show you a couple of things because sometimes visuals might be stronger than words. So let me share my screen. So I always start sharing that, most of what remains of nature is in the hands of Indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples are the ones that keep 40% of all ecosystems healthy in our planet. 80% of biodiversity is in Indigenous lands in the tropical forests. And you can go on and on in terms of sequestration of carbon, all of these issues that we as humanity are facing right now in terms of environmental crisis, not only climate change, but this very important aspect that Bridget talked about in terms of biodiversity loss and figuring out how to restore biodiversity is one way, figuring out ways to ensure that that biodiversity remains there is another one. A lot of our work is really engaging with Indigenous peoples that are so linked to their places. And for that reason, that biodiversity is still there. It is not something that it just happened because of luck, right? So with that in mind, we also have to remember that these territories and Indigenous peoples overall hold most of our cultural diversity. These are the places where most of the languages, the diversity of languages exist, right? 95% of languages are spoken by Indigenous peoples. And with each of those languages, there is a specific relationship to that biodiversity and that place. And sadly, with the loss of languages, a lot of that is getting actually lost. Last century, the word conservation was mainstream, and conservation is really focused on setting up protected areas. And in most places that involve moving people outside those territories because they thought that the only way to protect those areas was with no one there, right? And they built in some places fences. They also ended up manipulating communities, right? And changing their way of lives. And not acknowledging that these people were not only they don't call themselves owners, but the inhabitants of those places since time immemorial, created a lot of resentment. And that has not been good for nature or for people, right? And that is something that we do need to recognize. Nowadays, there are around 400 million indigenous peoples around the world, and they uphold vast areas, not because of conservation, right? But because they have these common identity and value systems that are linked to those territories. And this is one of the most durable aspects of humanity, right? As that identity passes from great-grandparents to the great-grandchildren that they have never met. So as Tero, what we call this is guardianship. This is not only the being in a place and being recognized as the guardian of that place, but actually also recognizing that with that comes a responsibility to maintain those places healthy for future generations as well, right? Because we recognize that these places persist, because indigenous people through time have earned a ton of knowledge systems and have developed their own technologies, right? As a result of these knowledge systems. And that has allowed them to keep these places vibrant. So without going too deeply into what Tero does right now, I want to share with you a short video that might express better what I am meaning with guardianship and the role of indigenous peoples. So let's hope the sound is working really well.
Malolele, my name is Nyakami. For generations, my ancestors have been guardians of our islands, protecting our land and oceans, taking only what they needed to survive. And we are not alone. We thank you for honoring the responsibility we share to each other and to every being on this planet. So we ask you to release yourself from all distractions, take a deep breath, and listen. If we pay attention, the signs are everywhere. Plant and soil, rock and river, every being on this earth shares a fundamental reciprocal connection with all others. This guiding principle of indigenous science is at the heart of all our interactions and is especially evident in Earth's most biodiverse places. These thriving ecosystems are energy-rich wellsprings of life, and they are home to more than 370 million indigenous people. For generations, we have shaped and been shaped by these lands and waters, gathering knowledge from their cycles and rhythms, developing ways of being that sustain our communities and our lands. Greed and violence, rooted in ideologies of colonialism and consumption, have put these vital ecosystems at risk. But we have withstood such forces and more. Our resilience and knowledge represent the fundamental way forward to protect these thriving places and all our futures. We are the indigenous guardians. We are the caring, unyielding protectors of an area more than twice the size of South America, spread across 87 countries. We safeguard over a quarter of the Earth's land surface and the life force on that land, which includes, for instance, more than 80% of forest biodiversity. We continue to innovate to further strengthen our ways. And we must be full partners to increase protection of global land and sea to 30% or more. We all have an opportunity for a shared future, born from our indigenous ways of living and knowing. A future in which we continue to fight, continue to tell our stories for future generations. a future based on the interconnectedness between all beings. A future built on Indigenous guardianship.
I hope you enjoy the guardianship video, which really highlights that deep relationship of Indigenous peoples with their lands, and at the same time that highlights that it is not something static, it is something that keeps evolving, and thanks to Indigenous peoples we can enjoy still a lot of the environmental benefits that we as humanity get, right? A lot of times when I make presentations, then people ask me like, so what does your organization actually does, right? How do you do this work? And it comes back to one particular right of Indigenous peoples that, you know, there are many, but that I find pretty important to always remember, which is the right to self-determination, meaning that Indigenous peoples have the right to define the future that they want, and that we all have the responsibility to respect that decision and support that decision moving forward, right? And in many cases, that decision of self-determination is so linked to the well-being of their territories and of their vibrant cultures that without both things being healthy, that self-determination cannot fully be expanded in its most impactful way, right? So we at Tero really work alongside Indigenous peoples, on one side supporting their efforts to come together to define that self-determination vision of their future, and at the same time to support the implementation of that kind of vision that they already have it in place, but many times what they need is to express it to the outside in a way that we can listen, because otherwise their rights are being trampled, right? So we support their efforts, for example, in the Amazon or in Melanesia or in the boreal forest of Canada, as well as in other specific parts around the world, to keep managing healthy territories. And with that, I am not just talking about the forest or the grasslands, but I am talking really about what territories encompass for Indigenous peoples, which is their deep relationship with all of the beings there, as well as from a practical way of let's protect our land from invaders and from others that are trying to destroy it, as from the we need to keep our spirituality alive, we need to keep our rituals alive, we need to keep our ceremonies alive, and we need to keep the relationships that we have with all of the beings, whether they are seen or unseen in these lands, pretty healthy. So with that, I thought that maybe for today, I wanted to show a second short film of, it is called The Sky Islands in the Solomon Islands. The Solomon Islands is an island, well, several islands in Melanesia, one of the most diverse areas in the world in terms of cultural, language, identities. And this video, this film that it is called The Sky Islands, really was developed by Indigenous peoples from the Solomon Islands, and everything from the footage to the script to everything, with the idea of trying to share with the outside world what does that relationship looks like, right? Because sometimes it is really hard to understand. So I just decided that I wanted to share that with you today, because it might be a good way of sharing a bit more about what we mean with guardianship. Let me know if this is working well.
Big fella bush no mountain looks him gray and green water color. Time me look him go from sightsee. I'm stop inside clouds dark a time. Every morning, chorus block at the animal wake up on me. Froggy make a noise, bird sing. Staka I look. From place me go. Every trigger story. Every drop of water carry memory. You may error and look out in this fella place. Here good for a kind of songs from me far. Here a kind of voices from me far. Then by you this meaning good, and by you have it. Life lobusu, and so symbol of him luxury. Mako are natara man ma ide na buburia and dikituma leti hai onang ma doana and mako no Trust me walk about, me looking mountain and clear me or say there's a feeling of connection with the street now. Let's say I'm hosting a lot of sites, cultural sites, temple sites that have me identity law, tribe law me.
We also communicate too one time the environment and all the spirit, and so it's part of us.
If me grow up, then me got a family. Me got a beginning, but me talent for time. Otam must look after good forest, then keep them good. If you me destroy mother something, about something about sapatu. If me destroy, but I'm hard to find them any place the wall man. When I be me saw finding place also. I think Sky Island no more place stop this time. Every place people spoil and finish now. And we must look out and look at the place below me. Look at the special place. Look at the Sky Island below me.
I hope the sound was good enough. And I know that if you want to watch it again, you can go to our Vimeo webpage. You just type Tero and you will find that and some other cool things. I hope that it also shared a bit of what we mean with guardianship, because there are no stronger voices than Indigenous voices to express what that actually is, right? And as mentioned before, great pressures threaten Indigenous guardianship around the world. And Indigenous peoples are now seeking recognition, partnership, and strong allies, right? And partnership, we have to remember that doesn't mean imposing our way of learning, our way of doing, our way of thinking. It is actually honoring and respecting and standing in solidarity with Indigenous peoples and being able to listen their message and listen carefully and attentively, because as all relationships, things are reciprocal, and we have to recognize that they are from the places, they know the places the most, and they know for sure the solutions that need to be put in place in order to address some of the big challenges that they are facing. One of the things that I always want to share is that I do have a son, and he's now 7 years old. This picture was taken when he was 1.5. And since he was born, I have been wondering whether he will be able to see the world as I have had the luxury to see, in terms of that diversity of life, diversity of cultures, diversity of love for the earth, and diversity of love for all of the beings in this planet, right? And to interact with people in territories that have such a strong relationship to their lands, and for whom the word conservation does not exist. And that does not exist because they don't know that they are not the owners of nature, they are not the owners of land, but that they have a responsibility to maintain these reciprocal relationships with all of the beings that inhabit their lands, their forests, their waters, to survive. And that always takes me to thinking whether my son will ask as well himself what kind of ancestor I was and what kind of ancestor we will be for the future generation, right? And this is not a new question. This is a question that Indigenous peoples have been asking for thousands of years. And I really like to bring this back many times, and I know that David has heard me say this as many times as he has heard me speak, but I want to bring this back because I do believe that this is a way of keeping alive the idea that we need to start asking ourselves on a regular basis, not only what we can take from this planet, but actually what we can and what we need to leave behind, in ways that really shift the thinking that we have around what well-being means. So with that, I want to thank you a lot for your time.
Everybody, can we please give a big round of applause, snaps, claps, and all of the emoji love to Margarita. Margarita, really, just thank you so much again. Your talk and the videos that you shared were so inspiring. There's a lot of questions in the chat about, number one, can you share the links to the videos? That was a big ask that was asked a number of times. And we've got a time for a couple of quick questions. Amanda, I think you were curating and figuring out what would be some good questions to ask. I think, were you all saying that we wanted Jim to ask his question?
Yeah, I think Jim has a really great one that I posted here, but he can also just unmute himself.
Jim, do you want to unmute and ask your question to Margarita? And thanks for sharing the link, Margarita. Jim, are you there? If Jim is not there or is unable to unmute, then Amanda, do you want to ask the question?
Sure. So he was, I think, synthesizing a lot of the previous talks we've heard this morning and asking, you know, preservation of the language, culture, and indigenous technology of a lot of these social ecosystems must be really difficult. And he asked, what are any of the keystone elements that you think would be really critical to preserve, you know, the social aspect of these indigenous cultures, as, you know, we recognize those are tied to our ecological aspects. What could we do for de-extinction of indigenous lifeways?
No, This is a really good question. And we all have to remember that colonialism is a very strong force, right? It's a very, very strong force that it is in play everywhere. And it expresses differently in many parts. But at the end, what it really pushes, among other things, is on assimilation, right? It really pushes people to assimilate, and all of us being more similar and more similar over time, right? Indigenous identities in many places of the world remain so strong. And one of the biggest threats in terms of assimilation is education, is the formal systems of education that are taught in many of these places, where they teach kids stuff from faraway places that it is not related at all with their own territories, with their own language, with their own identity. And that gives the idea that the outside is better, and in order to be successful in life, you have to leave, right? So when I am, and there are many angles on this question, right? So I am just touching on one, right? But one of the things that we have been putting a lot of thinking and effort around is how you actually start changing education systems so that they are more localized and highlight the relationship and the knowledge that people have with their places, which many times is not acknowledged, not by them, but by the outside. It is not acknowledged as valid knowledge and useful knowledge, and thinking how to really switch curricula in remote areas, for example, in the Amazon, where, or in Melanesia for that matter, right? Where the curricula starts not being that as taught from the central governments of these countries, but as developed based on what matters to the community, based on their knowledge, based on their ceremonies and their rituals and their seasons that are not the same seasons as the seasons in other parts of the countries, right? And they start pushing for that so that kids learn, yes, learning math and reading and writing and all of that stuff is super important. Nobody doubts that. But learning all of those things in a context that it is really theirs, where they can see how that knowledge can actually help strengthen their own identity and their own place. So that is a path, right? The other path is, in many places, revitalization of culture plays a key role, and Indigenous peoples are just working on that. In other places, just maintaining vibrant cultures means maintaining strong rituals, maintaining the longhouses, maintaining traditional knowledge that might not be shared beyond the community, right? And there are ways in which Indigenous peoples have been doing that and are still doing that, despite of the impact of colonialism.
So why don't we do one more question, and then Margarita, if it's okay too, again, we've got a Slack channel called Guardianship of Ecosystems, and if you are up for it, we can add you to that, because again, there's so many more questions in the chat that we don't have time to get to right now. But if you're up for joining that channel, then you could potentially engage with our participants there at your leisure in the coming days. We're getting giant yes pleases and exclamation points, so I think there's a lot of desire for you to continue the conversation with us on Slack. So actually, Margarita, if you send your email address to a private chat to Arnav, he can add you. And I think there's also, if somebody puts the link to the Guardianship Slack in the chat, then I think Margarita can potentially try to join that directly. But one more quick question to close. Jean-Luc, do you want to go ahead and ask your question to Margarita?
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to really quickly, first of all, I just wanted to kind of comment that de-extinction is not the best framing, because we're still living peoples, living cultures and everything like that. So I just wanted to make sure that it's very clear, you know, when we're using those terminologies. Also, I wanted to say that I wanted to ask for Margarita, because I saw that there was another question in the chat about how can we all become more Indigenous? And so when we're thinking about like what sort of ancestors will we be, when we're looking at the documentation, the documentaries, for peoples that are non-Indigenous, perhaps is this a way of driving the conversation about like how can we revitalize our ancestral connections to the lands where we're all from, where we're all, you know, each of our peoples emerged from.
I think that that is a path then look, and I think that it also comes to the question of knowing where you are, right? Where you are now, not only where your ancestors came from in places like the US, where people comes from all over the place. It's important, of course, knowing where you come from, right? But I think that there is this very strong value of acknowledging that, for example, here in the US, we are all in indigenous lands, in Native American lands, right? And many times we don't see that, we don't recognize that, we don't even think about it, right? Many places where we walk around now actually are sacred places or were sacred places, right? So I think that that starts also with acknowledging that we are in lands that were lands of Native Americans here in the US, and it is the same all around the world, that were taken violently from them, right? And through that violence, that lack of connection to those lands got lost, not by the Native Americans or the indigenous peoples, but by the newcomers that in many cases also came because they were expelled by other things, right? But I think that it is important to acknowledge where we are. Let's start with that. I have many folks come to me and say like, oh, I would love for you to introduce me to some indigenous peoples, right? And when that happens, I am always thinking, you know, if you look around, you are first on indigenous land, and for sure there are Native Americans nearby you where you can go visit. Usually there's a lot of generosity in order to share spaces, right? And books that you can read and that you can learn about the history of your land, right? So that is one of the first things that I like to share with folks, because it is not needed to go to faraway places as the Amazon or Melanesia in order to actually recognize and learn from indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples are here in the US and their cultures are vibrant still.
So everybody, I think the prompt that you left us with, Margarita, is something that we will resonate with for a very long time. What kind of ancestors will we be? So that's something we can all think about very deeply as an individual and as a global community. Everybody, can you join me in thanking one more time Margarita Mora from Tero?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margarita. And everybody, I know we've gone a little over, so we'll have a shorter break. I apologize, but I think hopefully you all agree that it was time well spent with our three speakers this morning. Let's take a 10-minute break, and actually a 7-minute break, and we'll come back at 11 a.m. Eastern time with our next sessions. We've got Marietta Ramdaska and then also Bob Hendricks. So we'll open up the spatial chat. So Jessica, if you put that into the chat, if folks would like to join that, that'd be wonderful. You can also hang out in the Zoom room as well and listen to Hello World. So we will be back in about 7-8 minutes, everybody. Thank you guys. And I will turn it over to Carolyn to introduce our next speaker.
All right, lovely. Thank you, David. I just want to connect in with what Margarita Mora left us with, this phrase, every drop of water carries a memory. That's so beautiful. And next up, we have a philosopher that connects memory and historical knowing to envisioning the future. So today we have Marietta Ramdaska. She's an assistant professor in environmental humanities at Linköping University in Sweden, teaching in the Gender Studies program. She's the director of the Eco and Bioart Lab, co-director of the Post-Humanities Hub, and co-founder of Queer Death Studies Network. Marietta works at the intersection of post-humanities, environmental humanities, continental philosophy, feminist theory, queer death studies, visual culture, and contemporary art. She's the author of Uncontainable Life, a biophilosophy of bioart, and has published in numerous journals. She's a prolific writer, and in the last year, she's written an amazing amount of articles. Recent articles include Environmental Violence and Post-Natural Oceans, Low Trophic Theory in the Registers of Feminist Post-Humanities, and Non-Living Queerings, Undoing Certainties and Braiding Vulnerabilities. So her talk today is titled Biophilosophizing with Bioart, Towards Ecologies of Non-Living. And Marietta is here in person, as well as she has a really heavy teaching load today, so she pre-recorded her video for us. Thank you so much, Marietta. Do you want to say hi briefly before we start?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here and to also listen to the talks before me, and after me, and later hopefully also trying to join as much as I can. So thank you so much. And I just wanted to say that I think in this talk really, what is really pointed out is very much like how the practices of bioart, all artistic practices, actually can mobilize philosophical thinking that can also help us understand the present and perhaps reimagine the future. So that will be from me. Thank you so much.
That's lovely. And so if we could get our video queued up, that'd be great. Thank you so much, Marietta, for joining us today.
Thank you, Carolyn and Marietta. And Rod, yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. We'll get the video going.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marietta Radomska. I'm an assistant professor in environmental humanities at Linköping University in Sweden. And my talk today is entitled Biophilosophizing with Bioart Towards Ecologies of Non-Living Matters. And for the most part, I will actually read the paper, but I should probably say also at the very start that perhaps in contrast to other papers today, this will be a kind of heavily philosophical piece of talking or writing. And I also really speak right now from the intersection of the engagement between philosophy, environmental humanities, queer feminist studies, and bio and eco art and visual culture, I guess. So one of the starting points for the search of new concepts, articulations, and narratives is to look at the questions of anti-epistemology. If we actually keep in mind, the question here you see on the slides, so what concepts, articulations, and narratives emerge from within contemporary practices of bio, eco, and new media artworks, this precisely draws us back to the questions of anti-epistemology, so question of matters and understandings that shape what both life and death are and what they mean. So in this paper, really drawing on process, queer and feminist philosophical perspectives, as well as several examples of contemporary eco, bio art, but also media artworks, I will offer a queer feminist biophilosophy as an approach that may allow us to better comprehend the complexity, vibrancy, and materiality of the non/living. And the non/living is here always already understood as ecologies of non/living matters, which call for not only an ontological reflection, but also for an ethical one, especially needed in the times of both planetary environmental crises and increasing human intervention in the molding of life itself, or some people also call that bits of life, which I think is very certain and very, very central to discussions at the BioSummit. And my kind of context also for this inquiry is also the context of kind of queering depth studies, which is basically, kind of engagement with questions of planetary necropolitics in ways that go beyond and sort of undo the, often Western normative narratives. And hence that second question on the slide as you see it. But let me dive into the questions of biophilosophy. So the binary juxtaposition between life and death, or living and non-living, brings us back to the very foundations and philosophical contours of the concept of life and its counterpart, death, which in fact can be traced back to the very beginnings of Western philosophy. As Eugene Vackett argues, we may distinguish two styles or ways of going about life in Western philosophy. First, the kind of dominant path that you can see in Plato, Aristotle, Kant, that looks at life by indicating its essence and boundaries of articulation, or in other words, defining, delimiting categories like boundaries between life and non-life. And the second kind of anti-epistemological path framed as biophilosophy that does not look for essences or binary classifications, but instead focuses on a critical, creative, and rigorous practice of asking what relations are precluded in such a division, in such a classification, unquote. In other words, biophilosophy is an investigation of life that pays attention to what transforms life instead of a twofold question of the basic principle and boundaries of articulation. An investigation that looks at life as a multiplicity that traverses binaries, avoids anthropomorphization, and pays attention to the issues of relations, their dynamics, and mechanisms of exclusion. So consequently, biophilosophy concentrates not only on ontology, so the question, what is life, but also on ethics. In other words, what relations is life embedded in, what gets excluded, and what values are being ascribed in those processes. Such a mode of engagement with both life and death can be found in the work of queer feminist philosophers, Claire Colebrook's Queer Passive Vitalism, Patricia McCormack's A Human Ethics, Rosie Braidotti's Zoe, Erin Edwards' Conceptualization of the Corpse, or Sarah Enser's Terminality, to name some of the key thinkers here. And there, life is often conceptualized as a material force and intensity, a form of dynamism, inventiveness, creativity, but also potential for destruction and idleness that extend beyond the organic and directly tackle the issue of death. It is their grounding in new materialist and queer feminist traditions of theorizing that allows them to approach life by focusing on its multiplicities and uncontainable character. Queer feminist biophilosophy addresses this life as well as its counterpart, death, in both ontological and ethical terms, not by taking a certain image of life, to paraphrase French philosopher Gilles Deleuze, and its attributed value as a point of departure, but instead by focusing on that which transforms life, multiplicities, differences, processes, and materialities that carry potential for generation as much as for self-destruction. Biophilosophy sees the processes of living and dying and growth and decay not as binary oppositions, but as complex, interweaving, and entangled phenomena. It entails focusing on the complexity of relationalities, intra and interactions, and connections and disconnections, instead of individual forms of life and the manners in which they may be categorized. So against the backdrop of contemporary ecological crises, a queer feminist biophilosophical ethical approach means not only responsibility for the protection or preservation of life, but also so-called staying with the trouble, to quote Haraway, of terminality, which Sarah Enser describes not only as a state and intimate belonging, but also as a practice and a horizon. In other words, the notion of terminality suggests a lifelong and shared condition, characterized by the potential for relations, nonlinear temporality, and an ongoing responsibility for and accountability towards the harmed, the ill, the perishing, and the dead, environments, ecosystems, organisms, and landscapes. So thinking through the lens of terminality is thus but one example of the queer feminist biophilosophical approach that does not depart from giving images of life and death, but instead from a multiplicity of relations, forces, and materialities encompassing the potentials for both growth, development, and decomposition, decay. So consequently, it also challenges the Western cultural imaginaries that draw thick dividing lines between bodies, between the human and non-human, organic and inorganic, and life and death. Employing a biophilosophical lens enables one to look closer at life-death, not as a fixed opposition, but instead attend to the phenomena and processes in a kind of more ecological manner. That is, as non/living matters, where the slash in the inscription points to the processual entanglement and relationality between what one may conventionally deem as living and non-living, or life and death. So the concept of the non/living stems from a transdisciplinary theoretical and practical engagement with bioart, bioscience, and philosophical approaches to life. The non/living reframes what is conventionally referred to as life in order to problematize the materiality, processuality, vibrancy, dynamics, and ambiguity of the relationship between the living and non-living, growth and decay, and ultimately life and death. So firstly, the non/living addresses the issue of locating the constitutive characteristics of life, that is, what counts as life and how we account for life forms that do not fulfill the four basic criteria of the living emphasized by bioscience, that is the requirement that the entity has a body, it metabolizes, reproduces, and is capable of movement, and yet cannot be classified as conventional non-living in that conventional sense. And some of the iconic examples of such entities are, of course, heroes of today, namely viruses, viroids, prions, and synthetic protocells. For instance, in order to replicate, as you all know, the virus needs a host cell. But also, secondly, the non/living attends to the complexity of the relationship between living and dying. That is their kind of material and temporal entanglement. These are the processes where material forces unfold, intertwined, and express themselves in what we evaluate as life and death. And by challenging binary categorizations and focusing on relationalities, the non/living problematizes the often taken for granted notions of life and death. So this entanglement, of course, comes to the fore in bioart, where growth and decay often collapse into one another in a limited space of a petri dish or an incubator, and where biomatter is sustained alive through technology guaranteeing optimal conditions, namely sterile environment, temperature, and nurture, among others. And of course, one of the examples, really iconic ones, and having some space here in this presentation, is the Tissue Culture and Art project, and their sculptures made of bioengineered animal tissues seated on biopolymer scaffoldings of certain shapes. And of course, I think that I will kind of stop here with reading for a moment and say a few words about the Tissue Culture and Art project, and maybe bioartworks as such, that are actually a very crucial thing, really characterized by the kind of vulnerability intrinsic to all beings and kind of dependency on technologies that both sustain and discipline organic matter. So here are some iconic images, including victimless leather, so this tiny little jacket. But we should say a few words about the entire series of projects by the Tissue Culture and Art project, namely Oron Katz and Jonat Zur, and some other collaborators, namely Victimless Utopia, really kind of composed of three sort of projects: victimless leather, so this kind of growing in the lab, a little leather jacket of that kind of size, disembodied cuisine, which you could see over here on the bottom, at the bottom of image, and DIY, the victimizer kit, which was a kind of device for, designed for reliving of animal bodies previously killed through the use of technology. So it is really, a kind of very ironic project, conceptualized and designed to deal with the issues of animal consumption, commodification, and exploitation. And it really kind of points to the fact that living in and consuming the world is never really victimless. And, you know, rather what actually kind of those works mobilize us to do is to ask ourselves which lives matter, which are recognized as the ones to be valued and the ones to be mourned. But also, you know, it asks us to not stop just at the surface and, you know, kind of reflect much more on our anthropocentric optics and ethics, our ways of relating to the non-human and attending to and consuming the world we form part of. And of course, the key issue here is that all those victimless creations, in fact, are created or grown with the use of fetal bovine serum that comes, you know, from fetal calves. Okay, and also, you know, some examples is, I think that you all know that those works, so I mean, I won't say more, but also, you know, the kind of artists play with the instances where during the exhibitions, the tissues either overgrew, you know, the space that was available or got infected, which happens very often in the kind of, you know, laboratory conditions. That's a kind of part of the entire procedure that, you know, things like that happen, and how much actually the kind of processes of, you know, growth and decay are really uncontrollable there. And, you know, while the fungi, for instance, you know, might flourish, tissue like the tissue grown there might not necessarily flourish, right? Okay, but I want to move right now on. So, you know, the non/living is also at the center of the corpse. The dead body of a human or non-human individual is a lively site where elements of the microbiome of the body, along with other organisms, flourish and continue to overtake the volume of the corpse. It is this liveliness of decomposition that leads to the perception of the dead body as abject, to quote Kristeva, repulsive, and simultaneously too alive and too dead. The materiality of the corpse lingers in liminality, where growth and decay are entangled with one another in viscerally visible ways. Recognizing the non/living character of the corpse demands revisiting and nuancing our approaches to the dead body beyond the double focus on either its abjectness or sacredness, which is, of course, the latter is only reserved, you know, to basically the human corpse. And here I would like to look for a moment at the works of Svenja Kratz, who is an Australian artist, and actually the series of works called The Absence of Alice, realized in 2008, 2011, and really drawing very much on the artist's engagement with the SAOS2 cell line, so bone cancer cell line, which was originally derived from an 11-year-old girl in the 1970s, whom Kratz calls Alice for the purpose of the project. And the works here, you know, use very different media. There are works that actually literally use the cells, the SAOS2 cells. There are also, you know, various media new media artworks, installations, etc. What is really important is that, you know, she is employing this visual storytelling to explore the kind of absent presences of not only Alice, so that human that was the donor of the tissue, but also non-humans sacrificed, so to speak, that is used by bioscience and other human modes of consumption. And this is particularly visible in the piece called A Shrine for Algernon, which is a sculpture of a fetal calf from whom, of course, the blood was drawn to, you know, then produce the serum. So we really see that, you know, those series of artworks is really a kind of, you know, specific wonderland where death becomes sort of deterritorialized. That is, you know, moves sort of beyond just the human subject and actually connects various entities, human and non-human, in the project, so to speak. And now I would like to move to a different type of work, and the artist Terike Hapoja and her work Community from 2007, which really consists of infrared recordings of dead animals of different species. The recordings are made in hours following the death of those animals, and basically show the, the changing body temperature as the bodies are cooling down. So there is a kind of idea of, you can see how it looks like arranged in the exhibition space, where you can go between the screens and really meditate and be part of that kind of trans-species community, sort of heading towards entropy, so to speak. Very meditative type of work, and focused on witnessing the processes of dying. Right, so now I will move back a little bit to theory. An entanglement of the living and non-living, organic and inorganic matter and life and death calls for an ontology that could account for its own flat, that is non-hierarchical character on the one hand, and its multiplicity of processual differences on the other. While a non-hierarchical ontology is desirable, it cannot be accompanied by flat ethics or ethical politics, as feminist scholars emphasize. The non/living as an ontology takes multiplicities of processual differences seriously by drawing on the life-death enmeshment, theorized by Gilles Deleuze as radical immanence. And calling immanence radical suggests that it cannot be contained within anything else but itself. So here Deleuze, Deleuze's approach is really anchored in Spinoza's notion of ethics, in which all entities and events are diverse expressions of one substance, which is actually equated with life. So from a Spinozian point of view, there is no, transcendent source of transformation. Instead, there is one radically immanent and, non/living, we could say, substance that expresses itself in a multiplicity of relationalities, neither immutable nor rigid, but unfolding through modulations and affects. So this Spinozian Deleuzian conceptualizations also serve as an inspiration for feminist philosophers, for instance, Colebrook's reading of passive vitalism, or Patricia McCormack's theorization of a human ethics that you see on the screen here, defined as, quote, indescribable relations and connectivities, seeking in secret and silence and invisibility, and never arriving at the sought. They are instigated by the life we must immanently live in order to respect the death that we perpetrate, unquote. So while grounded in and indebted to this queer feminist biophilosophical tradition, the concept of the non/living brings bioartistic and bioscientific practices and discourses as key partners in dialogue and catalysts for philosophical understandings. So to conclude really here, the biophilosophical perspective built on process philosophies and feminist and queer materialist theorizing allows one to attend to the complexities of relationalities between living and non-living, human and non-human on both micro and macro scales. So crucial for the understanding of, for instance, the materiality and the vibrancy of the dead body, the materiality of bioartworks, or even, ecologies of marine dead zones, like the one very nearby from here in the Baltic Sea. So such an entangled and one might even say undecidable queered and queering depiction of life-death ontology where human and life as we know it, in scare quotes, are no longer the decisive prism, also opens up an ethical reflection that is what relations to death, dying and mourning can emerge when the starting point is more complex and different. So thank you so much and looking forward to the discussion.
Wow, thank you, Marietta. That is fantastic.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
What a in-depth talk. That was really terrific. David, I don't know how we're doing on time. Do we have time for some question and answer?
Yeah,
here?
yeah, we can definitely do a question or two for sure.
Great. So someone ask a question from the audience. What do you guys think? Always interesting to try to relate this kind of philosophizing and this take on bioart to what's being done in the broader synthetic biology world. And so I think Marietta has given a wonderful kind of translation of how these ideas operate in both spectrums.
Carolyn, looks like Roland's got a question. Their hand is raised.
Go for it, Roland.
Hey, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, Roland.
Hi, hello.
Hey, Carolyn, hi, Marietta. Thanks for the talk. I have a question which I had actually earlier after reading a recent article you wrote about, I cannot really recall the title, although Carolyn mentioned it. It's also about the non-living and the virus, a recent 2020.
Right, the art notes one, right? I mean, non-living queerings, yeah.
Yes, thanks, non-living queerings. And when I was reading it, I had this one question which popped in my mind is, Günther Seyfried is also there, sent me this article years ago about Defining Life, the Virus Viewpoint by Patrick Forterre, which asks like, viruses were always seen as death, but he argues they're actually part of like life. So he wants to include them in a new system of life, which includes like, things which have cells and things which have like a capsid or like include them in the living. And I was wondering, would that change anything to your theories of non/living, whether a virus is seen as alive or death?
I think, thank you so much for, really exciting question, but I think that actually it would not necessarily. I think what that kind of, theoretical proposal, which I think that I've been working for a kind of while, and of course, each new avenue takes me somewhere else, is actually really trying to point out is that, that kind of firm definition, what is defined as living and what is defined as non-living is not necessarily making sense. I think I'm much more committed to the questions of, like what kind of relations are being made. And I mean, and then as well, to some extent, kind of thinking along the lines of, say, new materialisms, which kind of try to point at the question, what agencies are at work, and thinking about agency in that framework is, of course, not about intentionality, because we can't really say that viruses are intentionally doing this or that, viruses or anything else really, but much more about capacity to act, which is a maybe more fruitful way of thinking, how things work and how they relate to one another. Then, whether they have this essence or that essence, do they fulfill that criteria? Do they count as life or do they count as non-life? And in that sense, I think, it wouldn't necessarily like moving viruses to a different pot, let's say, or, moving any other entity, prions or something else to another pot wouldn't necessarily kind of affect that framework, but because that the non-living framework really tries to point out that it is very hard or perhaps sometimes impossible to necessarily, kind of ascribe very firm categories to given entities, but rather trying to like change our optics towards looking at both relations and processuality and the kind of, connections or disconnections being made. So I hope that this answers.
Did that answer your question, Roland? I think you got a lot right there.
Yeah, totally. I realized I asked like an essentialist question.
Essentialist artist. We are essential, aren't we? My goodness, that's like.
And I think.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just gonna, add one more thing, because there was, now I kind of don't really follow the chat properly, but I mean, there was some discussion point at some, at some moment earlier about the kind of question of scales. And I think that this also taps into that, what you pose, like that question, what you posed, Roland, namely, the question of what kind of scale do we operate, at, and, where do we look? I mean, where do we stop? So that's why the kind of, looking for essences doesn't make necessarily that much sense, actually.
All right, this is a wonderful conversation, and we can continue this one in Slack as well. I want to give just a really quick introduction to the track that will happen today. Following Marietta's lead, we have a track full of biomaking, envisioning, and metaphoring. So we will start out with two introductory talks, one by Georg Tremmel called Identities and Legal Statuses of Synthetic Cells and Tissues, and a second one by a person Marietta just mentioned, Yona Zur from Symbiotica. She'll do a talk called Outsourcing the Female Body. We'll then have two panels that further examine this juncture of living, non-living. First one called Envisionments of Utopia, Recycled Death. And then Eduardo will chair a panel titled Material Bioperformatics. And then completing the day cycle, Eloise and Camelia will do a round of lightning bioart talks. And then I want to invite all of you to come to the evening plenary. It's hopefully going to be very fun. It's continuing the tradition of gratitude offerings that, excuse me, that we did last year. The first speaker will be Hideo Iwasaki from Metaforest in Japan, and he'll do an A prayer, a memorial service to synthetic organisms and lab tools, followed by Andre Yule from Harvard, MIT, and Jean-Luc and a group of biofellows will then do a call out to global species nearing extinction. So we have a really great theme and a lot of terrific speakers throughout the day. And again, Marietta, thank you so much for coming here with your full schedule and leading us off. It's really wonderful to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll try to hang on a little bit. Thank you.
All right. All right.
Thank you, Marietta. Thank you so much. And thank you, Carolyn. Again, everybody, the evening plenary is going to be very, very special. So I really hope you all join us at 7 p.m. Eastern time as we wrap up the day and have evening plenary. And so I am so excited for our next talk. This whole day so far has just been really incredible. The exploration of the living and the non-living, animacy. And we're going to continue that conversation with Bob Hendricks. So if we can spotlight Bob as well. Yes, Bob is joining us from the Netherlands. And again, it's a huge honor to introduce Bob. Bob, I think, has single-handedly elevated my overall fungal and mycelium consciousness exponentially. So Bob, again, I appreciate you so much, both personally and also professionally. And your work is really, really mind-blowing and really incredible. You've been on quite a journey over the past even 2 years or so that we've known each other. Bob is the founder and the CEO of a company called Loop Biotech, which, as we were discussing earlier in the day, does work around building mycelium coffins. And so again, Bob's work kind of beautifully ties together so many of the themes from the session earlier in the morning around Guardianship of Ecosystems and ancient future technology, and then threading into the talk we just heard from Marietta on in bioart and design. So Bob, we are so excited for you to be here at BioSummit, and everybody, can you please join me in giving a huge BioSummit welcome to Bob Hendricks? Yay!
This was very warm, guys. Thanks a lot for having me. Thanks for this wonderful opportunity, David. It's been quite a journey. I'm enjoying it as well. Let me quickly share my screen to you guys. And David, can you confirm that you guys are seeing this?
We are seeing it, yeah.
Boom, nice. Okay, then we just take it away. And indeed, I just went in the call and I heard a lot about death and life, and definitely that's a topic we're going to talk about. So my name is Bob Hendricks. I'm currently living in Amsterdam. The kennels are right in front of me. It's dark outside, almost Christmas time. And indeed, I'm the founder of Loop Biotech. I'm sort of an inventor, architect, biodesigner. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a topic that maybe for some is a little bit more sensitive. And I'm going to start off with some very nice picture of me and my brothers. I'm the little pink worm in the middle. And I grew up with 4 brothers, and probably when you have siblings, you know, when you're the youngest, you're in pain, but you also get spoiled. So it's a win-lose kind of situation. But what I want to start off with today is some news that you might not already know, but unfortunately I have to be the one to tell you that when you die, you actually pollute the earth. And we live in this world in which a dead tree has more value than a living tree. And we're also living in a world in which a beautiful, intelligent creature as an octopus is dead a lot more worth than when it's alive. And yeah, how much is it worth? I mean, there was a discount, so now it's like 36 pounds. So it's not really worth that much. But for me, we're in a fundamental crisis, and I believe this audience, of course, is very aware of that. And I just want to give you my take on how I see things and what I wish to do. And my vision really starts with like, hey, everything we do, we sort of seeing the world of the natural world as a supermarket. And we go into a forest and we take an organism which is super smart, highly intelligent, has all kinds of crazy things which we could collaborate, but instead we decide, okay, we're gonna just kill it and turn it into a stupid material. And not only, in my opinion, is that parasitic, it's also very short-sighted, because what if we could collaborate with these organisms and we could create this whole new world in which our everyday objects are living organisms? And for me personally, that's the world I want to live in. And for a very long time, this world was very abstract, and I just went for it because it felt like this was the right thing to do for me. And today I will show you some examples of how that world is really happening. And one example is the living house. So imagine, living inside a home that is actually breathing, that is heating for you, and is able to self-heal itself. Imagine t-shirts that are growing with you, and complete cities light up with bioluminescent algae. And for me, this whole trip really started beneath my feet with mycelium. And I know you guys have already had Giuliana. She's like practically a mushroom herself. So you guys are already warmed up, so I'm pretty excited for that. But for just a little recap, mycelium is the root structure of mushrooms, which is actually a really weird thing to say, because it's the same with an apple tree and an apple, and the mushroom is the apple, but the whole tree that is living beneath the soil, the whole tree is sort of like the mycelium that's living beneath the soil. So it's sort of like calling a tree like, oh, the apple, the root structure of the apple. So we got sort of a lot of education to do on that part, but it's also the biggest organism in the world with 8.9 square kilometers. I don't know how that translates to a metric system, but it's pretty huge. But the cool thing is you can make materials with it. So I started exploring into that world. Okay, how can we make this a little bit more practical? Go from an abstract idea of creating living materials to, let's just try it out. And I quickly just show you guys how you do it. So you make molds, you put in a substrate, you pick some of your choice, like every fungi has a specific appetite. Similar, like you like to eat some takeaway orders, everyone has their specifics, right? Well, fungi are exactly the same. So we choose one, we inoculate it with mycelium, so we put those together, and then actually the organism starts growing under the right growing conditions, and you get material just like that. And I was in the lab and I thought by myself, this is the TU Delft lab, perhaps some of you guys know it. I was doing my graduation, I thought by myself, wow, this is pretty great. I mean, we can make materials with mushrooms, we can change the whole plastic industry. I have lots of ideas. This is pretty cool, right? So I was looking at my lab mates and I was like feeling hero. I thought like, my job is done here. So I hang up my coat, say, I'm going home. And the next day I came back and I was shocked. I was like, huh? What happened? I had so much good intentions. What was I doing? Because what did I see? I saw three samples that I created that I actually forgot about, that reactivated and had grown together. As sort of saying like, hey, Bob killed all of our other brothers, because that's what you normally do. You bake mycelium off and then you can actually use it. And here, those three pieces were there just saying to me like, hey, we're still alive. And for me, that was a fundamental pivot point, because I actually thought I was doing the right thing. And that brings us to this economic overview. So this is sort of what, if we look on the left side, we see a degenerating economy. So that's what we've been doing, like from our industrial revolution. We said humans first, let's go, screw Earth, take everything you can. And right now we're coming to a more conscious sense. We're going more green, we're going more sustainable, but still it's minimizing our impact. We're not adding value. And where I want to go is not being less bad. I don't want to be less bad, because in the end, you're only slowing the growth rate of being bad, if you guys still follow. I want to be good. I want to be a force for good. I want to do stuff so that after my life, I actually added value to the natural world instead of having a negative footprint. So we go into a regenerative economy. And I really started thinking, I was only thinking about myself with the mycelium. I was doing it in a less bad way by sort of, building things with it. But how can I actually add value? What does this organism want? So I moved my perspective from an ego mindset. It's all about me. I need something, to a more network complex, which is also symbolizing the mycelium network. Being part of a community and being part of a larger organism in which there are multiple connections possible. And this really changed for me the whole perspective on how I actually view my own life right now. So I looked through the microscope lens and I saw this mycelium. Well, what does it want? What does it want to do? And I'm coming from an architecture background. So I switched to industrial design. I met a lot of biologists, and I sort of became a mushroom like Giuliana. And I learned that mushrooms, they are the best recyclers in the world. They want to turn dead organic matter into key plant food, allowing new life to flourish. And they have this vast underground network that, as you've seen before, is a huge network. And they can share food with each other. They can share nutrients, they can share energy, and they even have their own cybersecurity. So imagine if the whole world would be a forest, and in my garden, or in my, I don't know if we have gardens then, but a tree next to me, I would put a disease on it. On the other side of the world, they would start making antidotes for that disease. That's how intelligent this organism is. And I bet you've probably seen a lot of TED Talks on how the secret life of trees, how the trees plant with each other, how fungi can save the world. It's a really fundamental network, and there's so much yet to be discovered. But what I learned is that it's the best recycler on Earth. And that struck with me, like, okay, so it wants to recycle, us actually. So I started thinking, like, so when I die, what actually happens? I mean, are there fungi then there, or how does that work? And I never really thought about that a lot, especially in the Dutch culture. It's really, it's pretty a taboo. I think for a lot of Western societies, it's not like celebrated. So I started looking into, okay, how does the Deadker world works? And to be honest, I was quite scared going to this direction because, all my friends were going to nice universities as research or doing consultancy job, and I was like this guy going into the funeral industry, like, well, what is this guy doing? And what I learned is that not even during our life we have a negative footprint, But even after that, we leave a scar on a beautiful planet, because our current, how do you say it, death care processes result in large-scale CO2 emission, soil pollution, and material depletion. And the biggest problem is actually that we see ourselves as waste. So we've created this industrial system similar to waste systems, and we do the same thing with us. But the thing is, when I look at you guys, I think you're beautiful bags of compost. And I mean that. I think you can add value to your ecosystem. You can be nutrients for beautiful trees and beautiful flowers. But unfortunately, not right now. Because the World Health Organization, among others, stated that our body contains 219 chemicals. For me, that was shocking. Like, what? So if I die during this presentation, I'm actually polluting the earth. And per day, you can imagine how many people die and how much soil is polluted. And therefore, one of our most valuable resources, soil, is in real danger. And all the toxins are ending up in our drinking water. A recent study showed actually that cemeteries can be compared, the soil quality of a cemetery can be compared to that of a landfill. And for me, this was like, hey, but why is nobody talking about this? Because it's a taboo. The whole funeral industry, they don't want you to know about this. But it's a real thing, and it's starting to get more attention. And the thing is, for me, this is a funeral site. This is nature's cemetery, and I love to go there. It's a beautiful place where you see life and decay mixing in one beautiful cycle. There is no end. There is just this continuous movement, sort of a rhythmic behavior. So I said, okay, I think we can design something a world's first living product. And we said, hey, let's collaborate with the mycelium and develop the world's first living coffin that actually empowers humans to no longer pollute the earth when they die, but actually enrich their environment to become a source for new life. And this is how it grows. So we grow an organism in a factory now. I started 2 years ago, and now we have a factory, a facility. We grow it in 7 days. And the beautiful thing is the organism does all the work. We use almost no heat or energy. And the end result is a product that is biodegradable. So within 45 days, it's gone. And this is actually where the magic happens, because it's not gone. Because we do not kill the organism, it has the ability to reactivate within the soil. Well, guess who is within the soil? One of us. And that's a beautiful piece of food to say. And the mycelium is saying like, hey guys, let's host a party. Let's facilitate this decomposition process. And actually, oh, look at those toxins over there. Hey, we can actually recover them. We can isolate them so they no longer end up in our drinking waters. And that's a beautiful thing about fungi. They have an ability to neutralize chemicals, so they don't ever end up in the soil or in the human ecosystem anymore. And thereby they can add to the biodiversity value of a forest and actually have a regenerating impact and allowing new life to thrive. And how we can do that, that's a whole new changing perspective. I don't want to be a tombstone with my name written on it, Bob. I want to become a tree. I mean, that's amazing that you can see a tree and that's, oh, that's dead. His nutrients are now in this tree. He's a beautiful Sequoia tree, or I don't know where you guys are from. What are your local trees? And in the Netherlands, they're not so cool as in America, though. And we just launched this mission, and it started from an idea. And we said to a funeral site, we have this idea, we had a prototype, and we just went for it. We built a flyer. And on the first day, we sent that flyer, somebody accepted it. And from that moment, a living product, which has been an abstract idea of, who's going to use a living product? It's unhandy, right? It became reality. And we went viral all over the world. We had a first funeral, and currently we're already at 100 funerals in the Netherlands and in other countries in Northern Europe as well. And actually last week we went on CNN with Dying to Be Green, our mushroom coffins, the secret to an eco-friendly death. So it's been a really big roller coaster ride. And this is for me, this is really a moment of saying to humanity, like, hey, this is your opportunity to no longer leave your loved ones, but also a beautiful planet behind with a scar, but actively choose to enrich life after death. And by working together with an organism, we have to change our perspective and work more from a life-centered perspective, from a nature-centered perspective. And that's super hard because the egoic mind is super strong. And in my definition, that's one of the problems. And one thing that really helps me personally is to think like, hey, I am an organism. I'm no better than an ant. I'm having a role here on this world. And how can I collaborate with other species, and what can we do as a common to save the natural world? And I think for you guys today, you can choose here right now if you wish to be waste or compost. Thank you very much.
Yes, Bob. Hold on, let me get back over here. Bob, can we do a huge round of applause to Bob Hendricks? Oh wait, I think we lost Bob on the spotlight. Can we get Bob back on the spotlight? Yeah, there you are, Bob. You should go back and look at the chat. There's a giant set of reactions and comments in the chat, and you had so many great quotes too. We have a Words of Wisdom channel on our Slack, Bob, so you'll have to check that out. And please join us too. And we have an Ancient Future Technology channel on our Slack and a Guardianship of Ecosystems channel. So you should definitely hang out there, Bob, and continue to chat with us. But we've got time for a couple of quick questions. I think, Rachel, did you have one? Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. I think the question I had to do with the idea that there are many mycelia out in the world, and that maybe some mycelia are actually invasive species in other parts of the world. So say your IKEA styrofoam alternative is made out of mycelia, it gets shipped somewhere far away, and then people compost it, and then somehow that takes over and causes a problem. So I'm just wondering, is this known? Could there be problems of actually sending mushrooms around to the wrong place, so they're not just making you into useful compost instead of waste?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Rachel. To just give you a little background, my assumption is that it's possible. It's good to know that in the context of fungi, some are invasive and some are not, and more dominant than others. We have a clear vision on that. Like, we work only with species that are non-dominant. So for example, so in Europe, we only grow it here, and then we, sell it locally. That's also in our vision, that if we go to America or a different country, we would like to work with the local species. So you actually, start enriching that environment. And that's also cool, because then the architecture of a coffin sort of culturally binds to the surrounding.
Okay, great. Do other folks have questions for Bob? You can raise your hand in the Zoom, or you can just unmute yourself too, if you have a question. Again, there's a lot of reaction, Bob. We all want to be trees. That's one big thing I think that we're all united on. We all want to be trees. Oh, Carolyn. Oh, Carolyn Jones. Hi, Carolyn. So glad to see you here. Hey,
yeah,
Carolyn.
Great talk. I love it. And Bob, I just wanted to make sure, because I'm an art historian, I'm always like dragging in earlier projects. So I want to make sure that you know about Jae-Rim Lee's important project a couple decades ago. She developed a mycelial shroud. But the more interesting part for you is that her participatory art practice involved training these decomponauts. So particularly people like me who've had to have chemotherapy, which is a kick-ass antibiotic that basically just wrecks your immune system until you can rebuild it. She worked with people that knew they were confronting their death openly, and she trained them initially in how to begin the detoxification project. And also she had a little, ornamental part of the project. I have no idea if this is biologically sound, but she trained the mushrooms on parts of their body. In other words, growing a specific strain of mycelial creatures that would really enjoy the hair, the fingernail clippings, the skin, right? So anyway, it's a very important project. She actually formed a company with it, so you should just like check that out.
Yeah, I think I know. It's called the burial suit, right? Or no?
Yeah, the mycelial burial suit.
Yeah.
The company, I'm not remembering the name. Anyway, she's now working on subliming corpses for the Sherpas on you know, the Himalayas, because they don't want those things.
No.
Right. Anyway, so she's been a death doula for a long time, and we owe her a lot. So just like, you know, recognize she's part of your tree. She's part of your living root system, because those root systems also go over time, which is so interesting, right? So we often think of space with those underground trees. Some people call the underground part of the tree the actual brain, because it's sensing the environment with its hyphae, with the hyphae symbionts, right? They're symbionts with those hyphae. Anyway, just like a rambling comment, but just like do some homage to J-Ream.
Nice.
Thank you,
Thanks
Carolyn.
Maybe good to add to that comment. Real cool other companies. It's called Recompose. It's actually in the States. I think it's near Boston, and they're really also composting humans after they die. And then you literally get a bag of soil when the process is done. So it's also pretty inspiring.
Let's do one more quick question. Frank Lee, go for it, Frank.
Oh, hello. I was just curious, what is the legal status of these natural, these mycelial coffins? Like, have you worked with governments to make sure that this complies with any laws and environmental laws for the disposal bodies?
Yeah, nice. Thanks for that question. For me, of course, in the beginning, it was like, okay, how does this even work? And the thing is, it's a real cultural thing. So, for example, in Northern Europe, everything is allowed. So that's also why we're focusing on those markets. But in more religious countries, for example, Spain, Italy, there are really weird laws. So, for example, you have to be able to stand on top of a coffin. That's like a law. But if you do it with a mycelium coffin, of course, it's going to break. But definitely looking, for example, in some states of America, in New York and California, which are a bit more progressive, there are already laws that has to say like, hey, it has to be biodegradable. But it definitely will be a threshold where to go first and where not to go.
Great. And let's sneak one more in. Soren, you want to unmute yourself? Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello. You said that you use mycelium to get rid of the chemicals and to recycle the dead body. And you also said that you found in your lab a few mycelium bricks growing together. And I made my bachelor's thesis about mycelium, and I thought about the same. And I wanted to know if you had some thoughts about using some different features of mycelium, like a self-healing product or so.
Yeah. I mean, we could go over hours over this. But just a quick thought. I think what is interesting to go from the perspective, like, what does the mycelium want? Why does it want to heal? And think about a product that is around it, or maybe from a human perspective, what if something that we want to heal, so something we use and then we want to heal it again. Maybe a good tip is to look into Elvin Karana. She's from the Technical University of Delft, and she has built a roadmap. It's called material driven design. So it's a little bit different than life driven design, but it grasps your minds a bit, and it really helped me in the process as well.
Okay, thank you.
So Bob, I think one of my big takeaways now is when we meet and when you look at all of us, that you look at us and you see beautiful bags of compost. So I will forever have that in my mind when we gaze at each other in Zoom and hopefully in person soon enough. Everybody, can we give another giant, huge a round of applause and some mycelium love to Bob Hendricks. Bob, appreciate you. That was so awesome. Thank you so much. And everybody, before we go into our break, we'd love to just tell you guys a little bit more about the tracks that we have coming up later on in an hour. So I just want to say we're going to take a 15-minute break. We're going to come back with John Leong from Kupu, Hawaii. You guys are not going to want to miss this talk. John was an Obama Fellow and is doing some of the most impactful work in the world with youth and agriculture, and just such an incredible human being. One of his best lines that always sits to me and really moves me is, you know, you're never too young to make a change. You're never too young to help make a change. And so John's going to join us after the break. But before we go to the break, I'm sorry. And then after John, we're going to take a group photo together. Okay, so it's very important. You don't want to miss being a part of the group photo. Now, for the group photo, because we've had such a great conversation today about animacy, about living objects, non-living objects, and so on, find a favorite object to bring with you into this photograph. This is very important. So you can think about this over the next 45 minutes or so, but grab an object, and at 12:50 Eastern time, when John wraps up his talk, we'll all take a group photo together. Okay, so please make sure you be very thoughtful and think of a good object, living or non-living, or animate in any other way. But before we go to our break, I want to turn it over to a few folks to talk about the wonderful tracks that we have in this afternoon. So I'm going to start actually with Sophia. Sophia, today, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, Sophia. So Sophia, can you go ahead and tell us a little bit about what's going to happen this afternoon with Open Innovation?
Sure. Well, can you see my screen?
It is loading. Yes, there it is. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we have a wonderful program for this Open Innovation track. So first up, a panel discussion with Alex, Victoria, and Aaron, our Open Citizen Innovator. We will discuss how to promote the effective participation of the community scientists towards empowering the development and next generation technologies, how to promote community access to science and all his resources. Then, so we have the first sections, future tech application. We have several talks with disruptive technologies, disruptive application, how to the bioprinting, open source, 3D printing and mycological research, and so AI in medical technologies. We have the frugal biotech resource. So, our wonderful guests, we will talk about engineering biological systems, biotech productions, automatization in experiment, all connected to open science. Afterwards, we have the last panel discussion, transforming biotech products into startups. So do you have a biotech projects? Do you want to scale into a business, an enterprise or company? So don't miss it. The last sections, we have the TAL section 3, the health tech class communities. We have amazing talks related to open access healthcare products for independent scientists, open science platform to share biological sequence and medical imaging data, and how to address towards the creation of a new system for patient advocacy. And finally, the session of leading talks, supporting community innovation with some members of Friends, and so yeah, don't miss it. We have a wonderful program for Open Innovation track.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sophia. We are super excited for that. And Jan-Maarten and Sequoia, do you guys want to share a little bit about what's going to happen in Guardianship of Ecosystems later?
Sure. Thanks. Thank you, David. Guardianship of ecosystems, recognizing ecosystems are under threat, and not just like the untouched by people ecosystems, but also the ecosystems that have groups of people living in them that practice sustainable and inclusive and local practices. The Guardianship of Ecosystems track is about what biocommunities can do to protect and also research or archive about ecosystems and the people that live there sustainably. So you could say that a guardian would be someone who looks two ways. It looks outward to protect and to see threats and respond to them, but also inward to learn what it is actually that we are protecting and archive what we are protecting. Sequoia? And now I like to give the word to Sequoia.
Sequoia, are you there?
You might be muted, Sequoia. We can see your
sorry
screen.
about that. There's a baby screaming in the background. But thank you, Jan-Maarten. So yeah, we're going to be starting off strong in Guardianship of the Ecosystems with a talk hosted by Jose Bazaran. Sorry, okay, maybe I should just go.
Okay, John. Well, we've got oh, Jessica, go ahead.
Let's say, yeah, we have a bunch of amazing talks. There's going to be a session about sort of indigenous protections in the Amazon area. We have a talk and then a couple of recorded videos because people couldn't join us. There's one that had to drop out at the last minute because they're actually battling destructive fires there. We're also going to be playing a lot of videos during the breaks from a documentary series called If Not Us, Then Who, about indigenous protections of the ecosystem. And I don't actually have the slides open, but the track's going to be amazing. You should all just come.
That's basically it, mic drop. Yeah, if you want to follow the conversations we've been having with Giuliana, with Margarita, etc., you know, you're not going to want to miss it. And then Salim, are you here to talk really quickly about workshops?
So thank you, Jessica. Thank you, David. In workshops, we are starting today, like yesterday at 1 p.m. Other tracks are starting at 2 p.m., but we are starting at 1 with introduction to data access visualization, general wrangling with Python by Andy Johnson. Then we have 2 p.m. We have 15 minutes breaks between each of the workshops. At 2 p.m. We will be joined by Salsabil Bioart. Then at 2:45 we have Ikra from Bioart, who would be talking about her on robotics. At 3:15 we have Jenny, who would be talking about home breeding enzyme with open enzyme collection. Then at 4:30 we have and our presentation would be on Zoom. Then we also have a workshop by Tim, who would be talking about how to design your own DNA scales in seconds. And we would be wrapping the sessions with Beno's How to Design an Eco Biolab at 7 p.m. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much, Salim. And so everybody, I see John Leong is here in the room, joining us all the way from Hawaii. It's very early in the morning, John, so thank you so much for being here. But everybody, we're gonna take just a 10-minute break. And so you guys can stretch, go into the spatial chat if you like, but please don't go away, because again, you know, John is gonna share about the incredible work that's happening with the youth in Hawaii, and you're really not gonna wanna miss it. And you're also not gonna wanna miss Ann Hugh explaining what's going to happen in the Youth and Science track today, which this is our first time at BioSummit ever having a track that's all organized by the youth, by our young people. So everybody take 10 minutes and stretch, and we'll be back at 12:20 Eastern time for John Leong to come and share about his incredible work with Kupu in Hawaii. So everybody, we will be back in 10 minutes for the plenary session today. So yes, good to see everybody. I hope everybody's been as blown away as I've been by this day so far. I knew it was going to be good going into it, but have it actually happen and unfold, I'm just feeling so so blessed and so so full of ideas, full of spirit, and full of enthusiasm. And really, the next speaker, John, I really need to acknowledge Corinne Takara for bringing John into the BioSummit family. Last year at BioSummit, when we were kind of organizing and pulling together the event, Corinne was like, we have to get John from Kupu. Kupu Hawaii is doing such incredible work. We need to figure out how to engage with them. And John and Kupu were so gracious and joined us last year at the BioSummit. And in getting to know John more and actually visiting Kupu this past year, I was just completely blown away by the work, John, that you and your community have been up to. And actually, let's go ahead and spotlight John as well. There we go. Great. Thank you so much, Rod. And so, so again, it's just a huge pleasure to have John here. I think John may have some special guests too. You're messaging in the background, so we'll see if we've got some special guests from John as well. But just to say, you know, John is the director of Kupu Hawaii, and you know, their work with youth, their work with agriculture, how they've been able to develop such an impactful community programs that have really had such a tremendous impact in Hawaii is so incredibly inspiring. And I was just saying before the break, this is our first year at the BioSummit having a youth and science track. So this is a track all organized by teens. So yes, shout out to all of the youth and all the wonderful folks, the young people. And John, I want to say, you know, when we were doing one of the prep calls for this today, you said a line to me that just like, you know, gave me chills, which is that, you know, you're never young enough to make a change. You're never young enough to make a difference in this world. So with that spirit, can everybody please give a huge ovation and applause and all the snaps and love to John the Young from Kupu Hawaii.
Aloha, everyone.
Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you for having me here today and sending warm thoughts to you guys over wherever you guys are in the rest of the world. And we have it's early, not too bad. It's about 7 a.m. here in Hawaii, and we're just loving being here with you guys to get the day started off great. Well, as we enter into the Thanksgiving season, I think that, you know, there's so much to be grateful for. We've had challenges, yes, in our world, but I think that there's so many things to be thankful for, and particularly that there's places and spaces like this where people are looking to use their skill sets and apply their knowledge to making our world better. And that's really the heart that I got from David when I talked to him about BioSummit. And it gets me so enthusiastic, especially to hear that there's a youth track and that the youth are the ones that are putting it together. Because as you said, David, you're never too young to make a difference. And really that's been a theme for my life and the story of what we're doing, is that we're really been about empowering people towards their potential, especially at a young age, and giving people the skill sets and the capacities, the experiences, but most importantly, unlocking that innate ability within them has been our heart and our goal over the years. And you know, every morning I spend a little quiet time trying to get myself a little centered for the day's craziness ahead. I have 4 kids, and we have work, and we have all these things that many of us have tasked with. And I need a little quiet time. And today I was reading, it said, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. And I just thought that was so appropriate for what I wanted to share with you guys today, because I think that's what I sense from this group, is that there's a desire to create change in our world, to thirst to be peacekeepers, to create change that's going to be positive, to create another world that's different. And I found in my time in my work that you have to live in 2 different worlds. You have to know how to navigate the here and the now and get through all the different things of life, like how to create an organization, how to pay bills, how to do all the things that are necessary to adeptly move things forward and take those responsibilities on. But you also have to live in a world that isn't seen yet, in a world that we're longing for, that we're hoping for a better place. And I think being part of doing the work is knowing how to live in both worlds and bringing them together and bringing other people with you. Not just charging off and doing your thing, but how do we know there's a world that we want to get to? We have to live in the reality of the here and the now. But how do we bring those 2 together and bring others with us? And I think that's a big part of doing the good work. David, if it's okay, I'm gonna put on my share screen, and I have a little PowerPoint presentation. If it's okay.
Yeah, of course.
All right, so I'm gonna just check. Let's see. I don't see. Can you guys see that?
We can. It's beautiful.
All right. Well, I'm gonna just share a little bit of my story with you guys as you know, small case study, and then and just some of the lessons learned along the way, and then we'll have some time for Q&A as well too. So Kupu is a nonprofit organization based in Hawaii. I've set up a few different companies and nonprofits over my time since 2000. And we started Kupu as a program that we were running for young people, 16 to 24 years of age. We started really tiny with like a $20,000 budget on the island of Kauai. And the goal was to run a youth corps program where we could get young people engaged in conservation. And I should back up that I was a young person that got to be in a program just like this in the 90s. And so I learned the power of it, that, you know, as I said earlier, you're never too young. And I just saw the potential in that. So that's when I went away. I went off to study at UPenn. Sorry, it wasn't as good as MIT, but one day I will be. Hopefully we'll get an experience there. But then I came back, and it encouraged, my experience in the outdoors encouraged me to want to start something in Hawaii, because I felt it was my Giuliana, or my responsibility, to make a difference here. And so that's what led us to starting our first company, Pono Pacific, and then we started running our youth corps program. Well, that youth corps program grew, and what was awesome is that we saw young people early in the years getting excited about conservation. Before in Hawaii, conservation was a weird kind of thing. I mean, it was kind of like a foreign thing brought to Hawaii at first, is what it felt like, because most of the people in it weren't from Hawaii, and most of the folks that were doing internships were coming from out of state, where there were developed educational pathways into conservation and natural resources. But what we found is that actually conservation and natural resource management were pretty innate in Hawaii. There's a natural desire in Hawaiian culture to care for the earth. There's a natural desire in our young people to be outside, surfing, hunting, fishing, and just putting two and two together and giving it into them in a way that they could give back, as well as understand that this is, you know, part of our culture and lifestyle, that we've already grown up here. It's not a foreign thing. It really encouraged a lot of young people to get into conservation. And so it was so exciting to see that we were seeing young people get into these fields and go off to higher education around this area, getting internships. So by 2005, 2006, we decided, you know what, we need to create a separate nonprofit just to do this work, because there's so much interest. So by 2007, Kupu was formed, and you're getting to see some of the examples of the work they're doing, from, you know, helping to restore trails, native species restoration, invasive species control, cultural work. Here they're making, in the lower right-hand corner, they're planting kalo, or taro, which is a staple crop here in Hawaii. And then in the upper left-hand corner, you're seeing them, after you boil that, the root, the corm, you can make it into what's called poi, or pa'iai. And that's one of the main foods, and that's a young person pounding poi over there. So they're getting to do a lot of variety of great projects in natural resources, cultural, and other areas. And since 2007, Kupu has gotten a chance to grow. You know, we started off with just myself and my friend using my mom's computer, borrowing my uncle's 4x4 truck to get out into the forest to help weed whack trails, and to do invasive species control. And last year we had over 700 individuals involved in our program. 500 of them were on payroll. So just to kind of give you a sense of, you know, you can never start too small. And sometimes you just have to hold the small things, hold those visions that you have, and just work on them little by little. And then you start to create impact and change. So to kind of give you a sense of where we've grown to today, you know, what's really cool about the work that we do is that it's something that people from all different platforms in life can really get along, because there's so many awesome impacts. There's the environmental impacts. We're working on the front lines of climate change. Being in an island, you know, we have nowhere else to go. We bring in all our food, or not, we bring in 90% of our food and about 80% of our energy. Climate and sea level rise is going to impact us much faster than the rest of the world. That's a challenge, granted, but I also think it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to get our act together first, to be the people that know that because we are on the front lines of it, we need to create a resilient community and need to give back. And that gives us an opportunity, I think, to create models that can be scalable and transferable, and not just in the environmental area, but how do we work together as a community? How do we shape our economy to be more regenerative and not extractive? And so Kupu really takes all of these principles into play, and we have impacts that are in the environment. We have areas that are around workforce development and training up and empowering young people in their educational pursuits and their work pursuits. And there's also economic benefits too. So I'm just going to quickly share a few of those really fun impacts that we've had. So as you can see on the screen, we've cumulatively, since we started in 2007, we've been able to remove about 151,000 acres of invasive species. And to put that in perspective, that's Disneyland, I think I heard was Disneyland California Adventure Park in LA, if any of you guys have been there, is about 80 acres. So and that seems huge. And to put that in perspective, look at what our young people have done. Our young people have cleared that many acres. They put in about 1.5 million native plants back into the ecosystems that are sensitive. And it's so exciting, you know, from a carbon sequestration perspective, but also from helping to restore our native ecosystems and our native species. Hawaii is the endangered species capital of the world. We have, if you look at the endangered species list in the United States, there's 4 columns, and we have like one of the columns. So 25% of the endangered species are here in Hawaii. And the list goes on. You can see some of the great work we've done in the coastal areas, trails, streams maintained, and some exciting things that are happening, like in the trail area. There's been an outcry since COVID, where we've seen, because of tourism, our main industry decreasing. It's actually brought some of our natural resources back. And I think there's been a lot of community desire to see that, you know, we understand there's a need for jobs in tourism, but can tourism be a little bit less harmful and be something that contributes towards the benefit of our society? And so Kupu was asked to actually help to pilot a way in finding ways to bring our communities together, so to have tourists that are less ignorant and more appreciative of what's happening. So we created a trail ranger program with our tourism authority. And so we actually have some trail rangers that are in smaller communities that are highly used, like Pololu on the Big Island. And it's been really neat because we have people that are lineal descendants from those areas working, and they're also able to help out and ease tensions. They help to provide proper education. They're turning around tour groups that aren't supposed to be there. They're illegally there as a commercial activity, and you know, really just making the area much better, providing authentic information to the guests that are coming as well too. So some really fun things that have been happening environmentally. This kind of shows where we're working throughout the islands. But also what's exciting is that our work has brought us to other parts of the Pacific. As an example, here is our fellows program. We have folks here from Guam, Palau, Saipan, Rapa Nui, and American Samoa. And so we've had a chance to get to work in other parts of the Pacific. We have programs that are ongoing with NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, the national parks, the U.S. Forest Service, and others, great organizations throughout the Pacific. And we're even in what we call our 9th island, Las Vegas, because there's so many Hawaiians that have gone off, folks from Hawaii that have gone off to Las Vegas to live. And so we call it our 9th island. So we have a little program over there too. So some of the economic benefits, you know, I got a chance to share our message with Congress a few years ago, and I was on the Senate committee, and they're talking about young people in national parks. And what's really cool about the work that we get to do is that it's bipartisan. You know, it's getting the really important environmental and social work getting done. But, you know, we've also have some really tremendous economic benefits. So we've been part of a Columbia University study, and we found that youth corps, and particularly what Kupu has done, have a huge impact. And so we've been able to stay in touch with the professor, and as we've looked at it, our socioeconomic impact is $153 million. And that's really exciting. But what was even more exciting to me is that for every dollar that we're spending, we're seeing at least $3 in impacts. So it's a multiplier. This work is creating so many different dimensions of impact, whether it is aversion of cost because young people are now no longer going in a certain track. They're creating environmental impacts, creating educational impacts, trainings, and then of course, the service benefits that are being provided. It's really multidimensional. And then we're able to take people with us. Our goal has never been to be a standalone organization, but really to be a part of an ecosystem and to be just an enzyme doing our part to catalyze change. And so our goal is to empower grassroots organizations all the way up to federal agencies. And so we have about 400 people in our ecosystem, 400 plus organizations in our ecosystem that we help to support with our members and that we provide young people to work at. And another way we've created some economic benefits is we've created social enterprises. So we believe that the nonprofit of the future isn't one that's just going to rely on grants, because how do you create change and create impact? It's by meeting the everyday needs of people, but giving them an alternative way to achieve positive change in doing it and making it easy for folks. So that's what part of our goal is that, look, we want to create an economically sustainable programming that can be true to our mission, because if we're just on grants or philanthropy, when that runs out, like things happened early in COVID last year, then what happens to the mission? And furthermore, you know, if we can create really great opportunities for folks to get involved and all they're doing is doing something that they do every day, then we can start to catalyze change by replacing the existing institutional opportunities with alternatives that are bringing life. And so here you have our center, which David got to visit. It's we took a place that was called the Crack Shack, because it was used just for homelessness and for drugs and a lot of really bad things that were happening. And then we were able to revitalize the space. We turned it into a really great place. We were able to find help for some of the folks that were living in that area. And then we made it into a really great community space. It's within a park right on the waterfront. And what's been really cool is that in addition to being a space that provides classrooms for our young people who've all dropped out of school, they can get their diploma here, and then they go out into the conservation world and cultural world and do work outside. But in the weekends and evenings, we created a social enterprise around a culinary program. And the reason why we did culinary is because many of the kids that came to our program hadn't eaten, don't get a regular meal during the day. They're coming from high poverty areas. And so we decided, you know, we're going to create an opportunity for young people to move upwards in life while we feed everyone else as well too. So they provide breakfasts and lunches, but they also provide for our members. But what's also really cool is that in the weekends and evenings, we have it as an event space. And that's been really cool for us to be able to provide those opportunities for young people. And we're seeing so much social mobility because of the trainings and the experiences they're getting. So there's one of our young persons with Eddie, our head chef, over there. And what's also been really neat is that this space is hosted all kinds of really cool things, from like government activities, like the State of the City address that we had, to corporate events, to community events. And you know, yesterday we had a young person that couldn't afford a wedding space, and so we just had a wedding over there for them, and it was just one of the most remarkable spaces on Oahu. And we're able to create those opportunities and to create a space that congregates and brings culture, community together around really important topics like climate change and our community. And then finally, some of the other areas that we're really excited about impacting is, you know, I think the environmental work is just a vehicle for us. I mean, I shouldn't say just a vehicle, but it is really important for us. But it's, I think our heart is that we want to impact young people through the work, and that we want we want a way to engage with them, so that all the things that we're doing is not only just transformative for today, but more importantly, that we're creating a better next generation. And so, you know, to date, we've had over 5,000 people involved in the program, and we're able to provide educational benefits. So we've provided over $6 million in college funds through our AmeriCorps award. The site that I shared with you, we had 100% of our individuals that have dropped out of school there, but there's an 86% retention rate in our alternative diploma program. When I skipped over a point that some of the great long-term impacts that we're seeing. About 79% of our participants pursuing or currently employed in the green workforce. And then I also wanted to share that just as a whole, even though all of our programs are not only focused on opportunity youth or under-resourced young adults, 80% of our population we found comes from below median household income, and about 60% come from poverty level incomes. So just to kind of give you a sense of the population that we're getting the opportunity to work with, it's really impactful to see this is creating transformative opportunities. Here's one story. So we have several different fun stories, and I never thought that we'd be involved with beauty pageants when we started this. But here's a young lady who is amazing, Maya Miyashiro. She was in our program down at the center. She had dropped out of school, came into us, found her love for conservation while she was working with us. And so you can see her in the middle in the field. It's the same person on all three pictures, by the way. And some people are like, who's that girl in the mud? And who's that girl in the pageant gown dress? But she decided that she wanted to go to college afterwards, and she had no means to pay for it. So she found out about 2 or 3 months before that there's a scholarship pageant, Miss Teen Hawaii, that she could apply for. She did so, and most of the girls that are running have come from, you know, they're coached, they're there for a couple of years, they're, you know, training and everything. And she just went in and did it. And Kupu was, they said, well, what school do you go to? She says, well, I go to Kupu. And they're like, what is Kupu? And, you know, and her whole platform was about conservation. And so she ended up winning it. She went to Florida to represent Hawaii as Miss Teen Hawaii, and shared her message about conservation and the important work that we're doing out with the rest of the community. So it was so cool to see her grow. Here's a couple other examples of young people who have gone on. On the left-hand side, we have some of our alumni. They're about 8 years out, and they created their own honey company. So their entrepreneurism is so exciting. And then over on the right-hand side, we have John Brito. John's the third person from the left. And John was in our Molokai program where there's a 50% unemployment rate on that island. And he's went on to do multiple programs with us. He went on to become the core member of the year. Nationally, there's about 20 to 30,000 core members throughout the United States. And he was chosen his year as a core member of the year. And then in addition to that, he got selected as one of President Obama's White House Champions of Change. So a young man from a small little island of about 6,000 to 9,000 individuals, you know, fighting against the odds, but now he's permanently employed with the Department of Land and Natural Resources and leads crews, and is actually a crew leader for us with Kupu. He mentors Kupu members in his place of employment. So what's next for what we're doing? We are so excited. We have you know, the center that we were able to share about. We are an alternative. We got selected by the Department of Education to be an alternative learning center, where we're able to get young people actually not only their GED, but now a full diploma. And the State Department of Education is going to be paying for teachers to come down there. We're getting our centers back. We provided 100,000 meals to the community last year. So we didn't know how we were going to do it, but we said, you know what? Our role right now during COVID is not to shrink back and to get concerned about our own budget or how we're going to, you know, keep our programs going, but we're going to we know that we didn't do all this work to build up to today so that we could shrink back when our community needs us. So we went out and said, look, we're going to start providing meals. And then some of our partners came in and said, hey, we want to fund that. We want to support you to do that. All in, we provided 100,000 meals into the community early in COVID, before the PPP loans, before there were unemployment benefits to help out. And we were really excited to make a difference because of that space and because of an amazing team down there. And then we also just got funded to put together a cool food truck. So we're taking food from our farm and we're able to get it into the downtown community now through one of our partners, which is a bank. So we're really trying to get into the central part of our core economy and community and change messaging and share about how we're changing lives, getting things from our community and reversing the trends of importing 90% of our food and trying to bring things from our local community into the main part of our downtown area. And then finally, you know, what's been really cool is that we started as just a small little idea. We were a program. We were able to start to catalyze impact. And then last year, we really started to create policy change, to create systems change. And we were able to create 3 laws that were brought into, approved, 1 at the state level and 2 at county levels, that approved a Green Job Youth Corps. And so this provides a vehicle for funding to do this, to do more of this work. And we just signed a contract with our state through this Green Job Youth Corps Act that will allow us in 2022 to add an additional 130 jobs into conservation, sustainability, and agriculture. So we're super excited about these changes that are happening and shifts that we're starting to see within our state. So this is just some, we was able to get some really great press over in Hawaii and around the world as well too. And I think that's what gets us most excited, is that in the end, what this does is it helps us to get a community that's engaged. So just to kind of, Dave, I don't want to go over time, so just let me know. But just really quick, some of the things just to kind of share what were some of our lessons learned were that each of us here is here for a reason. And, you know, sometimes you may have a small idea and you may not know where it's going to go, but just take courage, you know, take those calculated risks for righteousness, because if you don't do it, who will? And, you know, each of us has something special in us. When I was thinking of going off, I was at Wharton and I was thinking of going to work in New York or San Francisco. I got offers there. And then I was talking to a professor and he said, you know, yeah, there's risks to entrepreneurism, but there's more risks if you go into that corporate world and you're not fulfilling the dream that's placed just within you, because there's a special dream within you that needs to get unlocked. And so I remember that, and that was such a pivotal moment in my life. It's important when you can to try to get a seat at the table. And I think that I had the privilege of spending time as part of the Obama Foundation Fellowship with the Obamas. And one of the things that Michelle said to us was that, you know, it's important when you have an opportunity to get there, not just because we want influence or power, but because we get to set the rules when we get a seat at the table. We get to start to determine the outcomes for the communities, the world around us, when we can have influence in our world. So there's going to be people that have influence, and it's either going to be people that have right motives or wrong motives. And it's not a bad place to be, but it is bad when we let those that don't have the right motives only be the ones that are at the table. So if you have the opportunities to take a seat at the table, take a seat and try to make change in your communities. But along with that, it's so important to play the long game. You know, we can't, all the things that you saw were over 21 years, and we can't do this in isolation, and you know, we can only do our part in the narrative of change. It's unrealistic to think we're going to create a change for the whole world. I mean, the richest people in the world who wanted to create change haven't been able to do everything that they wanted to. But the important thing is that we link arms together and we work and do our part in the narrative of change. And make sure you're doing things that are sustainable for yourself, because if you do it and you burn out after a few years, we're not going to be, you know, there's so much more that could be done if you're able to do it in the long game. So just remember that we can do what we can, have fun with what you're doing, enjoy yourselves, and remember, we're just here to do our parts. Have an island mentality. And what that means is that here in an island, we realize that we can't do things alone. We have to work as partnerships. Our communities are smaller, our resources are smaller. So that means that we need to do things together. I know that there's my wife was telling me about, you know, how sometimes that Darwin mentality, that's the mentality that pervades in our world, where it's the survival of the fittest, where we need to think about, you know, just the strongest surviving. But the reality is, if you look in Hawaii's ecosystems and ecosystems around the world, there's a symbiosis that happens. There's a critical ecosystem that's developed where there's a dependency on one another. And that's what creates the healthiest environments, the healthiest watersheds, is when we can work together. And then finally, have fun. You know, this work it's really important, but if you're just doing it and it becomes just a labor and not a labor of love, then we're missing part of the point. And, you know, part of it too is we can get so involved in our work that we forget the important jewels and gems around us, which is our family, our friends, and just to really enjoy those moments together. So as much as important this work is, we need to be balanced as people too. And as much as we want to create change, we know that some of the most important change happens right around in the people around us first, and then we can go outward. And finally, continue to find things that invigorate you, that allow you to hope again, to have optimism, to have joy in the work that we're doing. So make those times for yourself and find the things that you really enjoy. Because I think for myself, that has been key, making sure you go on those hikes, making sure that you're going on the trips or spending those quiet times, whatever it might be that helps to build you up, because the work you're doing is important. It was made just for you. But if you guys aren't there to do it, then the world loses out. So with that, I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate this time to get to share with you all. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the summit. I'm happy to take any questions, David, if you have time for it. I may have gone over, but feel free to just let me know what's best for you guys. So thank you guys.
John, let's go. Everybody. Applause, the love for John Leong.
Oh, thank you guys.
John, I'm not sure if you were monitoring in the Slack. And actually, if you stop sharing your screen, John, then we'll all look at each other face to face. But John, your talk was, I think, such an incredible synthesis of so many of the different talks we've had at BioSummit so far. Your reminders to celebrate, and we are going to celebrate a little bit later tonight as well, is incredible. Your reminders about systems versus individuals, that's been a really big theme we've talked about throughout today. Actually, earlier, Giuliana, in one of her remarks, was talking about how like trees are this incredible example that individuals actually don't exist, that we are inherently a part of very complex systems, and that we always need to remember that. And I want to say, John, too, we were in just throughout this whole, there are several organizer chats, and everybody's like, okay, so when are we going to do a crossover between the Kupu Fellows and our community bio fellows? So we want to confirm that with you like live right now, just so we can make that happen.
Let's do it.
Yeah, and we're not kidding. I will be contacting you to get something done so we can do like some virtual event to let them meet each other, some sort of networking.
In person in Hawaii, Maria. In person in Hawaii.
Yeah. That is.
I will commit to going to Hawaii. The rest of you all got to pay your own way there, but I will commit to doing something out there. But yeah, no, absolutely. We'll get the fellows groups cross-pollinating so we can extend the network and extend the learning and the opportunities and the family. Extend the family.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. But John, again, and we have time for just a couple of quick questions. I did want to say too, I think part of why your story to me was just so kind of mind-blowing and so inspiring is the massive impact that you've had, like both in your community, but also the ability to create a sustainable organization. I think, for this larger movement, one of the biggest challenges has been, people have built different types of labs, built different types of community organizations, but it's so hard to keep both the energy going, to keep the spiritual and the emotional part of it going, but then also the financial part. And I think what's so just massively inspiring about your story is that you've been able to build a really successful business model where you're doing all this impactful work. But I mean, 500 people on payroll, 100,000 meals being served in the community, millions of dollars of impact. I mean, it's such a incredibly inspiring story. So the other kind of ask is maybe you can become like one of our unofficial or maybe official advisory board members to the whole movement. You can just kind of hop on and we can ask you for advice, because I think the sustainability part is so significant. And so your work there again has been massively inspiring. And then the one other note that I wanted to mention too, I think, Corinne, I know is going to be joining you in Hawaii not too far, but not too long. But we do hope that if you do build out a wet lab, a biology lab of some kind, you're now plugged into the network. So we are all here to help support you and, to do any kind of, molecular biology, cell biology, et cetera, in your spaces. You got us as, your lab mates. So we're all here with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And everybody, if we can do maybe like one or two quick questions before we wrap up. And again, Anne Hugh, I've got Anne on deck to introduce the Youth and Science track. And you guys remember, we're going to take a group photo in just a second with John as well. So make sure you've got your object, whatever that object is, go in and grab it, because we're going to take a photo together as a group and also with John. But any quick questions before we wrap up with John Leong? You can raise your hand. in the Zoom. Oh, so there's a question about the name behind Kupu. Yeah, actually, do you want to ask that question? You can unmute yourself and ask. And say your name
Okay,
too.
thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Giuliana. I'm from Indonesia, and I love that Kupu name because it means what is it? A butterfly, and it's really beautiful as what you work. Like, I'm just curious about how you all come up with the Kupu name and what the story behind that name. And also, I have one more question: how young is young for the Kupu that can be empowered? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jana, for your question. Well, what a beautiful name that Kupu means in your language in Indonesia. I've heard that before, and there's a similarity in the Hawaiian word Kupu, and it's both about transformation, whereas a butterfly comes from being a caterpillar and transforms. In the same way, Kupu means growth in Hawaiian, and it refers to the early growth. And we got the name when we were driving in the Big Island and working on the Big Island doing some trail work. And over there's a lot of lava flows, and the lava, it's part of the natural process, but it creates a lot of destruction in its path. But what's really cool is that one of the founder plants that first brings life back to the area and starts to transform the hard lava rock into soil that can then sustain life is the kupu fern. And same meaning, but and so really when we were thinking about the work that we wanted to get done, that was really reflective of it, is that we were taking, really trying to work with young people in the early stages of their growth, but that we wanted to empower them to do the work that would then start to terraformat the world around them into a better place, and to create life, and to take things that may have been challenging and difficult, but then convert that into something else that's better. And so that's kind of where the name came from. The second part of your question, sorry, Jana, can you say that one more time?
Yeah, so Kupu is to empowering young people. So how young is the young?
Yeah, so we started 16 to 24 years of age was our primary programs, but as things had it, there was more of a desire to see younger individuals get involved. So we actually started programming now within the Department of Education, where we have kind of a Teach for America model, that it's working in the natural resource and ag pathways, which unfortunately has gotten the stigma of being like the pathway you go to if you're not succeeding in the other pathways. But we're trying to change that now and make that into a pathway that's creating entrepreneurism, that's creating opportunity for young people, and where the future of our society can be growing is in these green industries. So with the DOE, we decided we need to start younger. And so we have programming in that pathway that goes as young as like 12 years of age. And we also have an intercessory camp that we started doing for kids that young as well too. So so probably 12 is the youngest that we start to hit. Although I'm sure that it'd be great to go younger, but that's not within our wheelhouse right now.
John, seriously, we could not be more inspired today. There's so many comments. I hope you go back and have a chance to look in the chat. But one of the best ones was, you're giving hope for the human race, like optimism for humanity through your work. It really, just so blown away, so inspired. And I hope to, again, we've got the Youth in Science track happening a little bit later on, and we also have a Slack channel, John, I can invite you to. So I know a lot of people are really excited to continue engaging and figuring out how to work together. So. This is just the start, John. We're going to keep bothering you to figure out how to collaborate and work together more. So, so just expect that your inbox to get some messages from us. And everybody, can we just do one more big, huge round of applause for John Young? Thank you so much, John. Really, really incredible. And can we do another big round of applause for Anne Hugh, who is our one of our leaders of our Youth in Science track. So Anne, I'm going to turn it over to you now to tell us what's going to happen a little bit later today in Youth in Science.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. And one more time, thank you so much, John Leung, for your amazing talk. I am, as I'm sure everyone else is, so incredibly inspired right now. Like my heart is so happy. Can't describe it. But on behalf of the Youth in Science Organizing Committee, I am so excited to share with the BioSummit family our first ever Youth in Science track. So we are starting at 2 p.m. this afternoon. Please join us. We have a stacked lineup of youth scientists giving short talks. We have other members of our community coming in and giving inspiring talks about their own paths. And we also have some workshops and panels. So our track is completely youth organized. And just as John said, you're never too young to make a change. And we really embrace that with this track. We have designed this track to amplify the voices of youth scientists and trailblazers, and also to inspire youth to keep pushing forward in what they're doing. So please come join us in the chloroplast at 2 p.m. this afternoon to hear from our community members. Thank you.